No Jumper, coolest podcast in the world. And today I'm here with a fellow shaved head, egghead looking ass white guy, Anthony Fantano of the Needle Drop. How you doing, bro?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I'm very excited
for this.
Yeah, this is a collision that, because when it comes to like music-based YouTubers, there's not that many people who fit into like a certain segment of like with us, I guess like the real similarity would just be the frequency that, you upload how many times a week on average?
I'm uploading pretty much every weekday and at least once a weekend.
Right. And then you have your other channel as well. So you have a very consistent output. So I kind of like, I think of like me, you, academics, and like, maybe a handful of other people that really stand out in terms of doing like the YouTuber thing, like we all kind of know what that is if you pay attention to like the YouTube community, but doing it in the music world of sorts.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can understand why people are excited to see us together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also because we're both polarizing individuals. So kind of seeing us collide over maybe some polarizing shit. I don't know.
There was a meme I saw one time that was like a picture of me, you, Andrew Schultz, and Yes Jules, and I forgot what it said, but it says something about how bad white people suck. So I felt really lucky in that moment to be included in that group. I'm like,
yeah,
damn, that's
good,
tight.
That's good company, I guess.
I like everybody in that photo. Yeah, I actually consider everybody in that photo my friend, and I think that everybody in that photo is a good person. And so I enjoy, if I'm going to be smeared, I at least want to be smeared with a few other people that I think are good people overall.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk. What should we dive in on here? And why are we so polarizing? Why are you so polarizing?
I think because I just don't really give a fuck what anybody thinks about what I say.
And is that really, really consistent? Like, is there nothing that, like, a commenter or like that somebody in your field could say about you that's really going to set you off?
I mean, of course people can say things that set me off. I guess I'm not like really worried about, sort of being set off. I guess it's sort of a matter of who's worth and who's not worth being set off at.
Right.
Like there have been artists and there have been producers and, other music journalists who have like come at me over Twitter and, obviously that's worthy of response because it would just be hilarious and, just like create a lot of internet drama, which really everybody benefits from. I mean, nobody on Twitter is actually like looking to school anybody or learn from a real conversation. I mean, if you are, you're a total fucking loser.
Well, unfortunately, that's true, though. It's like people always want to say now, like, oh, it's a conversation. We need to encourage dialogue.
Twitter is not for a conversation at all. Like, if people come at you over Twitter, they're doing it so that their followers see. Mm-hmm. And they're doing it so they can be like, yeah, I really told that guy. I told him he was ugly and bald. And old. And now he knows. Now he knows.
I get old so much now. And I'm just like, come on. I know how old I am. Yeah. And so everybody working in the rap industry is old.
And yeah, exactly. Like Future's fucking old. 2 Chainz is old.
But
Kanye
especially on the industry side, it's like if you're like 22 and you're in the rap game and you're working in the industry, it's like there's a 99% chance that you're like an intern or like just barely getting your foot in the door. It's like, yeah, I'm 33. I've had enough time, and I haven't been in the music world that long. But I mean, I've had enough time to sort of get my thing going. Like the kind of thing that we do. Don't you think it's hard to imagine a lot of really young people doing what we do? Just it was just strange. Like
it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine young people being at the level that we are because it takes a while to get where you are. You know what I mean? Like obviously, when I was that age that you're talking about, and I was starting this YouTube channel, like I had a fucking 100 subscribers, and nobody took me seriously. So it's like you have to start somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like it's a time thing, but it's also like, for you to have a perspective that anybody's interested in hearing, the likelihood of you having like a voice that would survive podcasting or doing album reviews, and the likelihood that you would have a good enough voice per se at 21, it's very, very low. And I would love to meet the next great 21-year-old hip-hop podcaster. I just think that on average, a 21-year-old's not really going to be able to pull it off.
Honestly, there's a lot of different factors. There's the fact that you're just going to be inexperienced. I mean, when I started doing my YouTube channel, I already had years of interning at radio under my belt, so I kind of already had the idea of like a show format in my head and sort of how to deliver, but still I was really shitty. Like my first year of reviews are like total shit.
Didn't you delete all of them?
I deleted all of them because they all had
music, right?
Copyrighted content in them.
But the entire song?
like 10 seconds of a song or something.
And that seemed really scary to you at a certain point?
I was getting DMCAs.
Oh, okay.
I didn't just do it because I thought it was a bad thing. I was getting DMCAs.
Because I can make a video and put 10 seconds in it and it won't get detected at all, ever.
YouTube was a little more draconian about it back then.
At the time. It was more hands-on.
I was more in contact with people at YouTube at the time, and they had,
scared you, sort of.
They had recommended to me,
right.
Specifically not to do it.
Does that hurt you? Does it ever seem kind of like surprising? Like, oh, I run like a YouTube channel about music and I never actually ever get to play any music ever?
Honestly, I think it actually was to my benefit in the end, because I think it sort of challenged me to better describe what I'm talking about, because, I could easily just be like, hey, there's a really cool guitar part at this thing, and, it's significant because X, Y, Z, and blah, blah, blah. And, whereas now I have to like actually specifically describe the intricacies of what makes it significant. And I think, honestly, again, it's worked out for the better, because even if at the end of the day I did kind of get away with, using these music clips, there's still a chance that even if I'm not getting DMCAs thrown at me, they could
still do it by hand.
That they, not even by hand, but they jump in and say, okay, we're going to let the video stay up, but we're going to get a cut of the money because our copyrighted content is in the video.
Right.
Which is also, which is like an even worse situation that I wouldn't want to deal with.
And because they can like maliciously try to take down the whole channel, which is, I think, is the part of the problem that academics has had in the past.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring this up. Did you see the clip of on Everyday Struggle, academics, Joe Budden and Vic Mensa? And Vic Mensa basically like challenges academics in the sense he says, who the fuck are you to have an opinion about what's going on in the hood in Chicago and the communities, stuff like that. And that kind of rung true in the sense that that's kind of almost like the response that you get, I think, to a lot of your music. Like, who the fuck are you to have, or a lot of your videos, who the fuck are you to have an opinion about music? And I think what's really funny in both cases is that there's tons of people basically doing what you or academics do or what I do, and nobody really gives a fuck and nobody cares at all. And that whole question of like, who are you to be able to have an opinion? It's like we don't ask that question of people with 300 followers.
Yeah.
But you're in a funny position too, because like people treat your word as if it's so authoritative, like as if you were to say a project is bad, that people just are not willing to accept that as just one man's opinion, right?
And also, like, you have to remember that like, it's not like back in the 80s or the 90s when like music critics and music journalists, sort of the major publications, a lot of which are still around now but are mostly digital, like were literally the gatekeepers. And, you didn't hear about something, whether it was, good, bad, or whatever, unless they covered it or said it was great or whatnot. Like, sure, I may have an opinion and a strong opinion about some album that you might like, but the thing is, at the end of the day, like, my opinion doesn't really affect whether or not anybody likes the new Lil Yachty record. My opinion, I have more. I loved for the most part, the latest Childish Gambino album, but nearly every review I've done of every album he's put out so far has been either negative or mildly neutral, and hasn't fucking affected his career a fucking lick as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
But the thing is, like, there are a lot of people who, are huge fans of him and huge fans of a lot of artists that I'm not the biggest fan of, but they just fucking get along and watch my reviews anyway because, they understand an opinion's an opinion. And even if we disagree on this one artist, later down the road, I'm going to turn them on to an Injury Reserve. I'm going to turn them on to a Death Grips. I'm going to turn them on to, a Brockhampton or something. Not to say that I'm responsible for those artists being where they are today, but, there are a lot of people who tell me personally that they wouldn't have heard of them if I hadn't sort of reviewed them and recommended them. So, I think what people need to kind of get over is just like their fucking feelings, because at the end of the day, like, honestly, like, who are you to have an opinion on blah, 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 blah. Like, in reality land, like outside of your fucking head, I don't really have any say over whether or not anybody's successful or famous or anything. Certainly I can influence people to try out a new artist who maybe people haven't heard of. But if you're on, you're fucking on. I can't step in and ruin your career. It doesn't fucking work like that.
And also, when you say, like, oh, I don't like the Lil Yachty album, it's like nobody should be terribly surprised you don't like the Lil Yachty album. I would imagine Lil Yachty's fan base doesn't overlap with your fan base too heavily.
I mean, yes and no. Like, I liked the Little Boat mixtape.
Okay, me too.
Which I got fucking crazy harassment for.
What'd you give it?
I gave it like a 7.
Okay.
And like even that, it's not like the most positive score. Like I liked it, but the thing is, like, people were just like, I can't believe you fucking like that more than blank face. I can't believe you fucking like that just as much as damn. I can't believe you fucking like that as much as, or more than whatever thing, And it's funny because, like, people get bitter over that, but simultaneously, like the people who are in my audience who are in the know, like they take that bitterness and they turn it into a meme, you know, because now it's like every single video has comments under it like, I can't believe you gave this a 40 and then you gave this other fucking album an 11, you know. It's just like just making fun of that whole mentality of just being like bitter over these score comparisons.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but do you sometimes feel like you're being crushed under the weight of the knowledge that your opinions are being consumed by a huge amount of people? Because like when you go to, how much your review of the new Kendrick album, how much did that get view-wise?
I think that's like sitting around like 1.3 million.
So that's insane.
Like
That's
it netted 1 million really fast.
right.
Like,
And you knew even when you were doing it, this was probably going to do 1 million, right?
yeah, for sure.
Which is insane to think about.
Butterfly did 2 million, so it was
Right.
going to get at least 1 million.
Right. So when you're making that review, is this in your head like, oh, like there are a lot of people who are going to see this that, number one, don't know anything about me, that don't watch my videos normally, and that to them Kendrick Lamar is their whole world and he's hip hop's great hope. Does that weigh upon you? Is that on your shoulders?
You know, honestly, like kind of not really, because I had been praising his material already up until that point. I was an early adopter of his stuff, so
Right.
you know, I felt like there was enough of a rapport at that point where I came out early and said Section 80 is great. I came out, you know, and said Good Kid, Mad City is fantastic, but I think he can do better. I felt like my prediction was proven true on To Pimp a Butterfly, which I gave a 10. So, I mean, you know, whatever my opinion was going to be, whether it was another 10 or a 2, I felt like at that point I had enough of a rapport where like, okay, listen, I know this artist. I've listened to this artist. I love his albums. You know, and I know that I have at least a base understanding of what he's about and what he's capable of. And, you know, I can capably analyze his music. So, you know, and, you know, that's just for you to just kind of take in and either agree with it or disagree with it. You know, all that weight and everything doesn't really sort of like hit me because I was sort of a fan of him before anybody was being like, oh, he's the next, you know.
Right. So if you did give him a 4, you'd feel like, well, I earned the right to give him a 4. Although that certainly
absolutely.
wouldn't be what people were saying if you actually did do it.
I met him over at South by Southwest
How'd
because
that go? Was he very familiar with your videos?
I didn't see, here's the thing. Me and my wife my girlfriend at the time, now wife, we were trying to see him. It was shortly after Section 80 came out.
Oh, so all the way back then. Okay.
Yeah. And he kept fucking dipping on his sets. And I think I went to 3 sets trying to catch him and he didn't show up to any of them. And then the third one, I just like, you know, we stormed out the back and I was pissed. I'm like, when am I going to see this motherfucker, you know? And then we're in the back alleyway behind this venue on 6th Street. And then he's like, needle drop Section 80 review. And then I turned around and he's like, you know, this like short dude's like, hey man, I watched the review. I loved it. And I said, oh, cool. And some dude was taking pictures. Somewhere out there, there's pictures of me and him. And, you know,
really?
Yeah. So
wow.
I have no clue who the fuck was taking pictures, but some dude was taking
That's
pictures.
That's rare. I'm into that.
And, you know, he said, and again, remember, this is shortly after Section 80. And it was funny because at the time, I wasn't thinking of his potential or anything or any of that. I was mostly just mad that I couldn't see him live. And I was like, why isn't this dude showing? Like, that was the first thing in my head.
Well, you just wanted to see how he was live.
Exactly.
You're like, I like the album, but who knows what he's going to be like live.
But he said to me, like, hey, man, this next record, I'm really going to challenge you guys with this next record. You know, I'm doing something really ambitious with this next album. And, you know, at the time, I wasn't really thinking about that as much as I was like, I just really wanted to see you live.
Yeah.
But, you know, like once Good Kid, Mad City finally came out and I had heard the whole thing, I was like, wow, you know, he really delivered on his promise.
Yeah, that was a gigantic album. Like it's almost, I think it's weird for most people because like at this point, most people that I know don't think about a Kendrick Lamar before Good Kid, Mad City. Like that's like a dead zone. Like unless you're like a very hardcore hip hop head, like most fans of him like know about him.
Some of his best songs are on there. High Powers, great song.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a really good one.
Yeah, there's another one too. What was it? Fucking President or some shit? I forget. I listened to that era Kendrick very little. So I was a little bit later on all that.
Yeah.
But okay, so is that a false equivalency thing when people say like you gave Damn a 7 and you gave Lil Yachty's mixtape a 7? Like are those different 7s?
I think it depends on what kind of artists they are. You know, honestly, I think Kendrick and Yachty are two totally different kinds of artists making very different styles of rap music.
Because it's clearly on a scale, right? Kendrick's a 7 for him.
Honestly, like the scale is just an enjoyment scale.
Okay.
You know, like yeah, you can compare them, but only in terms of like, am I enjoying them equally? You know, but I'm enjoying them for different reasons. You know what I mean? If you're going to throw a score on them in the sense that you're trying to objectively grade them, as opposed to just giving it a score, based on how much you enjoy it, then, to me, it would be like comparing, let's say, a 7, if you gave a 7 to a Converge album versus if you gave a 7 to a Nickelback album. They're both obviously rock bands, but they're both playing two incredibly different styles of rock music, and to me, that's like almost how far the divide in hip hop is right now, because you have artists that are super lyrical, super conscious. You have artists who are, doing the glitzy, glamorous, overblown, like arena-sized trap thing. You have artists like, who are these grimy, SoundCloud motherfuckers who are doing this way out, like super aggressive, overblown shit. Like there's so many different sounds going on right now.
Right.
And it's like, it's just getting more and more diverse every year. Even with trap sort of continually for, almost a decade now being this like ongoing, almost nonstop force, which, when it gets 10 years old, I mean, there aren't too many music trends that last beyond a decade. You know what I mean? Or at least are as relevant beyond a decade.
But do you feel like you're maybe throwing too wide of a net on what trap is? Because isn't trap at the end of the day just gangster rap? And at the end of the day, trap is not really that different than like a Atlanta-sized Mobb Deep, 10 years later?
No, sure. I hear that. I mean, that's definitely a point. I guess what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of, as far as fundamentals in terms of instrumental production and rap flow, that I think were such a sea change on like
Trap or Die,
on like Flockavelli, for example. That those sounds are still like ringing true to this day. Like we were just in that club just a few hours ago.
Yeah, we were just at a show together.
And they were playing two cuts off of that album, and everybody, it blended in so seamlessly with everything else that was
that's true.
Playing. It's like they played Hard in the Paint, and it didn't sound weird back to back with all of the new trap stuff. And that's because, again, a lot of those same musical instrumentals are still at play. Much in the same way that a lot of the same musical instrumental, a lot of the same musical fundamentals were at play through the whole hair metal era of the 80s. And I think that's kind of the same thing that's going on right now. I think we're kind of on the cusp of, what's going to be kind of a different sort of aesthetic and kind of maybe a mood change too, which I think guys like XXX are sort of at the forefront of. You have these dudes who are like so dark and emo and fucking like, alternative and off the beaten path.
See, I've like as much time as I've spent thinking about, SoundCloud rap and the sort of style of rap that, XXX and Lil Pump and so embody, I hadn't previously thought of that as like an alternative to 21 Savage aesthetically, in the sense that 21, like you can draw a really straight line between Gucci and Jeezy to 21, in my opinion, and like Waka along the way, T.I. along the way. Like there's like a very, very straight line to 21.
I would say 21 is kind of a part of the alternative too. If we're talking like who's the mainstream of the mainstream, I would say Future.
Okay.
I would say Drake.
I just mean that like 21, when I think of trap and I think of Gucci and Jeezy, and then I look at 21, to me he's like a very like, he's a traditionalist in the format that they sort of created, and that he doesn't stray too far from that. But then you look at X and Lil Pump and stuff, it's like they're going in a very different direction. But I haven't given a ton of thought to like what it might look like if somebody like if that sound became the mainstream sound.
Like a 21 Savage sound?
No, like a XXX sound, as if it like really aggressive. But I guess that's kind of the question, is like, it's like you had Nirvana, and then you sort of had like, Korn and like Limp Bizkit. I think kind of offered like
if rock could sort of reach that trajectory, I think hip hop can reach that trajectory, because I think right now hip hop is sort of carrying the torch of viscera and rebellion that rock used to, and has kind of in a way kind of given up on.
Right.
It's like really rappers that are kind of carrying that torch with this new era of like very visceral, very like it's very physical, it's not very mental, and it's very aggressive.
Right.
They're embodying that more than I think a lot of new rock bands are, who are either kind of doing like the glazed over, laid back, like, hey, let's just try to be the next dream rock jangly Mac DeMarco band.
Yeah. What do you even see as like trends or movements within like rock music? Because talking to some documentary crew earlier today, and they were saying, talking about that kind of stuff. And I said, like, the same kid that would have listened to Nirvana in '95 is like probably going to be a Triple X fan these days or something along those lines. Like all these former like interest groups seem like they're just funneling into hip hop. And then like even more directly, when you look at like a Suicide Boys, a Ghost Main, guys like this, it's like these are dudes who literally were in bands a few years ago and largely are just moving into
Much
rap.
in the same way that the Beastie Boys were in a punk band before, they
Beastie
started
Boys kind of
recording.
were a punk band early on, right?
Yeah, they were a punk band before they started, recording rap music.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the mirror opposite.
It's like a direct change, but like, yeah, I don't know. It's so strange to see that happening because, okay, like it's easy for us to look at Converge and Nickelback and say like there's no similarities, or at least the similarities are not worth discussing right now in general conversation. But then in hip hop, there's always been a push against labels because, like when people start to say that like, oh, Master P or fucking Cash Money, they're not really true hip hop. The movement wasn't to say like, okay, well, we're going to start our own thing and it's going to be called this. The movement was, no, this is all rap, this is all hip hop, and I haven't seen people really embrace genres in the same way with like aggressive music, like hardcore and metal. It's like genres are everything.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. I mean, I think part of that is due to the fact that the press has been kind of a little lenient on labeling things and just kind of like letting it all kind of sit under the hip hop window, because I think the writer community is sort of largely to blame for, the way things get labeled. And plus also, a lot of these labels and things, they sort of evolve later, because there are early new wave compilations where you can hear synth pop bands, the Ramones, maybe like a reggae band or something, or like a band like the Police, all on like the same compilation, or bands similar to those bands all on the same compilation. And that's because early on it was all new wave,
right?
Sometimes like these terms and everything, they kind of take a while to develop. Certainly people have taken to the term industrial hip hop.
Okay, I haven't really heard that too much. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like Death Grips, Clipping. There's certainly a track off the new Injury Reserve that I thought kind of fit that tone. There are a lot of these like new noise rappers, before even XXX was a thing, that sort of fallen under this industrial hip hop sort of banner, which a lot of people say that the reason that kind of popped off in 2011 and 2012 is why Kanye kind of went in the direction that he did with Yeezus.
But you think that foreshadows a lot of the sound that's coming out of Florida right now with the overdone bass and everything?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I also think in a way kind of memes enforce it too, because there kind of is that weird like bass boost meme.
Right, I love that.
Which,
I don't know how they do that, like what you have to do in Final Cut to make that happen.
You could do it in a lot of different programs. Okay. I know in like on Mac, like in a Soundtrack Pro program, it's pretty easy to do.
Okay. I like the one with Famous Dex when he's doing his ad libs. Sipping lean a break, Dexter. Oh my god, I love that one. It's so funny.
I like the bass boost meme too. I was talking with some of my buddies about it because, there's some memes that like can go mainstream and can go super normie, but I feel like that's a meme that's always going to be inherently sort of underground, because you're always going to have your average person who doesn't want to hear a big fat distorted blast of sound in their ears.
But so what is the meme called where it's like zoomed in on the face and the eyes are all lit up,
all lit up and glowing?
Yeah, is there?
I don't know what that's called,
but I associate that with the bass boosted meme as well.
Yeah. No, people definitely like mix those two memes together.
Yeah. They go together great. Yeah,
they go together really good.
Is there like a program that you?
I don't know how, there are some friends of mine who are deep into memes who are even, you've even asked me, like, do you know how to make the eyes all pretty?
Yeah, right? Like, is there a way to do that isn't just like going and laboriously doing it in Photoshop?
Yeah, is there an easy, lazy fucking way to do it on your phone? If there is, let us know in the comments.
And like, the meme of like all memes having to look like, I don't know what people really call it. I call it like deep fried memes that look like they've been like reposted by like 18 different Android users.
Yes.
Like,
they're like fed through 50 different like Instagram filters.
How do you get to that? I just realized I'm all banded up in here. I look like a total fucking douchebag.
I think basically, I think honestly, I could make one. All you got to do is just like,
get 18 Android phones.
Go into edit on Instagram, and before you post it, just press the X. But when you're, instead of discarding it, save it. And then take that save and then feed it through Instagram again. And if you do that like maybe 4 times, you'll get like a nice deep fried meme.
Yeah, okay. This is like a recipe. Like,
Yeah, I'm giving you guys this is a meme recipe show.
so what was the impetus for you starting the meme channel? Because I enjoy it a lot, and I could certainly see how you would want to like find a different way to make content that wasn't putting you into such a rigid formula as your day-to-day reviews.
It was a mix of different things. I mean, it's partially exactly what you said. I mean, that is the plan. No plan is what the plan is. So, I mean, you know, I guess I kind of got into such a regimen with the needle drop, and it's so methodical at this point, you know, that of course I need to think about reviews and put effort into reviews, but like, you know, when I go into a review, I know what it's going to be when I come out of it. You know, it's not like any question, you know, there's like a formula to it that seems to be working for me, seems to be working with my audience. You know, maybe if it seems like I need to change in the future, then I'll try to make that change the best that I can. But as of right now, it's not really anything I need to sort of change. If it's not broken, don't fix it. But, you know, like that can be a little kind of mind-numbing and uninspiring to just kind of subject yourself to that same process of just like I'm doing the same thing every day for the rest of my life.
Over and over. You think about that a lot?
Not really. Or, I mean, of course I think about it, but then I find a way to sort of create an outlet for it. And, you know, that is the plan, is essentially that outlet to just be like, okay, let's like reset and just do something that, as far as like writing or planning, there's like very little writing or planning in it at all. You know, it's just like I just come up with a dumb idea, and if when I think of the idea and I tell the idea to a few friends of mine, like they laugh, like they think the idea, the concept of just itself is funny, then I'm like, okay, let's just like do a weird improvisation based off of it, and then just like, you know, get a buddy of mine to just like do a bunch of weird, crazy, fucked up edits that he and I sort of talk a little bit about, and you know, he'll send them my way. Maybe I'll add some more like afterwards in post. And you know, there's also this kid from Brazil, shout out to Vapor Rub Boy, who edits some videos on the channel too, and some of his edits are fucking insane. Like,
really?
Between me and my buddy Austin, who edit a lot of the videos on the channel, and we've done some weird zany edits on the videos.
So
but
is
like,
this your only employee? This guy helps you out
I
with
have
that?
another buddy of mine named Jeremy who edits a lot of the videos on the Needle Drop channel. Shout out to Jeremy.
So at this point, do you do almost none?
Almost no editing.
Yeah.
I do a little editing, but most of the editing is offset. I used to do all the editing, but then the thing is like, you know,
Really taxing.
it is really taxing. But you know, now I've just like pay some of my friends to do editing. But this kid, like, he approached us and emailed me and was like, hey man, I really love your YouTube channel. I'm from Brazil. You know, I edit too. And, you know, here's some of like my meme videos. And I was like, you know, okay, you know, it seems like cool. I'll hand him a few videos and just kind of see what he does. And he came through with these fucking insane fucking videos. Like, if you check out my meme channel and look up these rapper videos, like I have these 3 videos. Hopsin is the greatest rapper. J. Cole is the greatest rapper. And XXX is the greatest rapper. And like, they're like these weird psychedelic trippy fucking out there odysseys. Like in the J. Cole one, I am talking about how in my previous video I claimed Hopsin was the greatest rapper of all time, but I got a bunch of comments telling me no, J. Cole is. So, you know, I like begrudgingly and sort of, you know, very skeptically listen to some J. Cole, and then all of a sudden my mind explodes and I'm all of a sudden very intelligent, and I reach the 7th level of woke.
Okay.
And you know, then from there I'm saying things like PewDiePie did 9/11 and you know, chemtrails and da 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 da.
And so how was this like, would this have been a pretty bland video if you had edited it and done like a sort of rigid job of it, but he did it and he took it to a whole different level?
You know, he has ideas that I would never think of. You know, I could sit there and tediously come up with insane fucking edits like every other thing, but the thing is I have reviews to do.
Yeah.
You know, I can't just like sink my entire, you know, day into doing that as much as I would, because sometimes editing like that is really fun. Just having the time to sort of sit there and come up with the crazy ideas and you know, the weird explosions and, you know, like doing bass boosts.
But if you want to be a YouTuber in 2017, it's basically like, oh, you can't do any creative editing, because like if you want to be a daily YouTuber these days, it's very hard to pull that off.
It is very hard to pull that off. And, you know, also like, you know, another thing with that is the plan is not to be daily.
Right.
You know, like put out a video every 3 or 4 days. I would like the videos to be more like, you know, it's so easy for me to do daily content on the Needle Drop because it's just informational. You know, it's not flashy editing or anything like that. Like, I kind of want these videos to be sort of perceived as like, you know, pieces of art in a way, and, you know, kind of be more slowly digested. You know, and obviously there are some shitpost videos on there that, you know, are less edit intensive and are just me like trying to make an ass of myself. Like, and sometimes they blow up like for some reason. Like, I made a video where It was just kind of this straight, almost very lightly edited shit post where I talked about the reason I left BuzzFeed. Even I've never worked at BuzzFeed.
I watched that. I forget what you talked about in it though.
Yeah,
but everybody's doing why I
like,
left BuzzFeed videos.
Exactly. So it was just like kind of making fun of that meme and just like beating myself with a belt as if like that, like they're just slave drivers over at BuzzFeed.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about going and getting a job at somewhere like BuzzFeed? You ever have those offers to like go be an editor at some website or something?
I've gotten like early on before the needle drop like really took off. Like there was this website that was offering to like salary me for like $60,000 a year and move me out to New York to sort of do what I do for that website full time.
Right.
And I turned it down, and I'm glad I did because I think I've been able to take it farther. As far as a brand just on my own than I would have sort of under the umbrella of another sort of more established brand to begin with.
You probably would have gone crazy having to fucking fit into somebody else's idea of how you're supposed to do content, right?
Absolutely. I think it would have been, that was kind of early on, as well. So it's like, I think I've grown a lot as a content creator since then.
Right.
A lot of, and a lot of that growth probably would have either been inhibited or altered in some kind of way had it been under the guise of a boss per se.
Have you ever, because I think one of the things and one of the reasons why people are so quick to say or to be critical of you is because there's just not that many people in the spotlight who are doing what you do. And that seems strange to me. I feel like you would get a lot less criticism if there were like 10 other reasonably popular people who were doing something like very, very similar to what you do. But I can't think of that many. And what do you think that is that holds people back from sort of seeing? Because to me, it's like if I was like a 21-year-old kid who just really liked music and I didn't have anything going on right now, I feel like I would be looking at your YouTube channel and being like, okay, I'm going to literally just rip that off and do my own version of that.
I mean, there are other YouTubers out there who have some good music channels, who I enjoy. Like some shout out to Dead End HipHop.
Yeah, I've watched their stuff.
Also Big Quint, also Sean C. Zeus is a reaction channel that I've sort of stumbled upon recently that I've been watching some videos from. And also Spectrum Pulse, also ARTV, and there are others that I'm forgetting as well that, I apologize. It's late and I can't remember all of them. But the ones that I like the most have a very different format from mine, like Dead End HipHop, but the thing is like,
it's more podcast-esque, right?
It is, I don't know. I like their style. I haven't watched their stuff in a minute. I like what they do. I think it's fun. I mean, why is it that I'm in the position that I am as far as views and I just broke 1 million subscribers? Why am I the only, music reviewer with 1 million subscribers? I don't know, honestly. Like, I think it's, all I can say is like what I'm doing and what makes what I'm doing work. I can't really speak for what's not working about Dead End HipHop, because honestly, like when I look at that channel, I think everything's working. I enjoy the fuck out of that channel. It's kind of really up to whether or not anybody else enjoys the channel, which a lot of other people do. I know for me, it's really about just consistency. It's of quality and also consistency of output. It's about, being sort of there when something drops. It's about being timely as well. I do my best when a big record comes out to have my review out that week, like once if a huge record comes out and you put out that review like 2 weeks, 3 weeks after the album's actually dropped, you're looking at like probably half the views that you would have gotten if you actually released the review the week it came out. Like maybe that's offset a little bit by the fact that the channel is as big as it is. So when people who are fans of the band, it kind of goes through the grapevine, like, hey, that album's old at this point, but he just talked about it now. Like, why not check it out? But the thing is, like with the way people digest music now, it's like it's so fast that you need to be talking about things as they release, almost, which is why like, a lot of these reaction channels have taken off because they can even talk about things faster than me. However, there's definitely an audience and definitely a demand for, I guess, the way that I'm breaking down albums, because while the reaction channels are good and there are a lot of people who watch both them and me,
they're mostly just laughing.
Yeah. I mean, some of them are, some of them aren't, some of them like do offer some decent commentary and, some of them go the extra mile to, like, especially with the Kendrick album that just came out, they'll do a reaction and then 3 days later they'll be like, okay, this is what I like really think about it now that I've had a few days to listen to it or whatever. And that's actually what some people were asking of me, like with that record and with some other records too. But personally, it's like, I don't want to spoil anything, number one. And number two, sometimes there are, sometimes within like the 4 to 6 listening period that I do on an album, sometimes between the 3, 4, 5 days, 6 day listening period that I have with an album. I do 180 after 180 after 180.
Really?
And it's not until like I actually get everything written down and I organize my thoughts that I'm like, okay, now it makes sense. Now I have like a grip of what I'm actually listening to.
Right.
And why and what it is about the album that I either like or dislike, and so much so that I can put it out there and explain it to my audience clearly.
When I was listening to the Kendrick album, I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm excited to listen to Anthony's review of this later, just because I'm like interested, like in small part, that was like why I was listening to it, was like not just yours, but like in general, like there's going to be a New York Times article about this, and I want to be able to read it and be able to enjoy that art as well, which I'm not going to be able to enjoy unless I've listened to the album a couple of times and sort of at least start to get, an idea of what I think of it. And then it's weird too, but because I really don't envy what you have to do, because I still feel like with what I'm doing, I'm able to mostly enjoy music on a very like primal level and not have to like clarify what I think of it. Like, I like the Kendrick album, but I couldn't like sit here and fucking list off reasons why, which but I also look at what you're doing, and I think that's pretty cool because, you're being incentivized to come up with like a more orderly version of what your thoughts are on the art you're taking in. So, kind of like with somebody like me, especially as like a complete shit memory, is like, a lot of times I'll listen to an album once or twice, and then it just sort of fades into the ether of my brain, and I don't really remember it 6 months later.
It is a chore, but simultaneously, I like that I've sort of put myself through it, because I feel like I get more out of music than I used to, because I really know what I'm looking for. I'm listening to things more attentively than I used to. It's not just kind of like this passive thing for me at this point. There are some records that, I used to love that I re-listen to them now that I'm like, oh, why did I ever like that? Right. And not in the sense that like, oh, I used to like listen to some shitty, edgy music when I was a teenager. I just mean like, some of the stuff that I might have liked in college or something that like now I think is like mediocre now that I see it in the grander scheme of things.
Right.
But, it's actually at this point, like I could listen to Damn just as casually as anything else, but if there's one thing I hate having to listen to sort of in a critic's head and have to analyze is just like classic stuff, because honestly, like some of that stuff I'd rather just enjoy casually and not have to think about it in that way.
But you don't do that very often, right? Where you review some old shit? I do it like once a year. I do like a full week of Classic Week once a year, and it's really all I can take. Okay.
Like it's kind of fun to see the reactions and everything, and I do it because people ask for it, but it's like it's not a huge traffic driver to the channel, because it's kind of like, I could review like, let's say, I don't know, Prince's Sign of the Times, but there's not like a whole rush of people searching for that album. Right. So I'm kind of like, at the mercy of whether or not people just are kind of casually looking it up to maybe hear a song, or just, looking up a Prince interview or something and maybe see my review and like, oh, okay, sure, why not?
But is that a big part of the thing that drives you to go and do a Kodak Black review, is knowing that Kodak Black has, 10 songs that have like, 20 million plays probably, and that it's popping up in the sidebar?
A huge part of YouTube is tentpole programming.
Yeah.
This idea that you release a video that is about or is somehow connected to an event. An album release is an event.
Right.
And this is something that I didn't know I was doing, or I didn't understand was a thing until like maybe years later, after it was, working for me and I had read the YouTube playbook or whatever.
Yeah, because they use that phrasing, the tentpole thing, in like some YouTube guide I read one time. Yeah.
So it's like, it's tentpole programming, as far as what they call it, so it's like my reviews are centered around the album release, that's essentially the event that what I'm talking about,
But doesn't it, because it's kind of like a perverse incentive there in a sense, because it really encourages you to review popular artists who have a lot of views and are going to pop you up in the sidebar, in comparison to maybe stuff that you like more but that isn't going to get as many views. Do you ever feel like there's sort of like a weird game going on there where you're kind of incentivized to review the Kodak Black album because it's going to get a shitload of views, even though that's not your favorite artist?
As of right now, I have maybe 5 or 4 albums on the docket that I want to review, and nobody's really asking me to review them other than me. It's just kind of out of my own personal interest. And over the next few weeks, fitting them in is definitely workable. As of right now, the only kind of way that sort of manifests itself is that if Kodak Black drops a new album, will I decide not to review an artist like, shout out to Billy Woods, who is this sort of obscure New York rapper who's got a really kind of unique style that I like a lot. I mean, I'm definitely going to review his album, but what might happen is that the Kodak Black album gets reviewed a day later, or I mean, the Billy Woods album gets reviewed a day later or a week later, because honestly, once that album comes out, there's not a million people searching for it anyway.
Right.
And that's not to say that Billy doesn't have a fan base and that, that he's not talented, but the thing is his fans don't need me to tell them to go check out the record. Really when I put that review out, it's mostly going to be for hopefully, some tens of thousands of people who watch me who aren't familiar with him, click on it just out of curiosity that it's another review and, check him out, So, I do fit in my opportunities to review more obscure stuff, review stuff like Injury Reserve, for example, because honestly, while sure, I have to review the Kodak Black record, I have to review the new Future record, I have to review, whatever, whether I like it or not, because honestly, there's a lot of mainstream stuff that I like. Still, I would go absolutely insane if I didn't give myself an opportunity and a chance to review something more obscure and review something that I'm really passionate about. And honestly, as much as it looks like on the surface that, yeah, obviously he reviews Kodak Black because that's going to get a lot of traffic. When I review the obscure stuff, it's just as essential, if not more essential, because when I'm sort of going on that path, I'm curating and I'm turning people onto something that they hadn't heard before. And that actually creates a sort of level of intimacy and devotion that wouldn't be there if I was just reviewing mainstream artists that everybody knew and everybody already knew what their thoughts were on.
Right.
Once you've turned somebody on to something, an idea, a sound, a song, a piece of art that changes their mind and sort of alters their worldview, like you're a part of that process. You're a part of that sort of life-changing process that people sort of attribute to you now from there on in. Somebody in radio, I think in NPR once told me that people will forget what they heard, but they'll remember where they heard it. And, that's very much, the same thing. If I ask people, it's like, name all these albums I turned you on to, or name my opinion on whatever, and they'll tell me they follow me, religiously. Sometimes people can't name stuff off their head, but they remember that they've had all these experiences watching my videos.
Right.
They remember that they've had these positive experiences being turned on to these artists and now look at music a different way than they used to before.
Because usually your memories aren't so much specific events. It's like little things about how you felt or like...
Absolutely.
You think about your vacation that you went on. If you went on a nice long vacation to some fucking island or whatever, and then you try to think about it, it's like you don't have enough space in your brain to fully comprehend that.
To remember how everything looked.
Right. You might remember a fucking margarita or like remember what the water felt like and just have that sort of overall positive medley of thoughts in your head, which is kind of like the way that a lot of people take in music too, which is kind of like, do you feel like you're on sort of a different level than the average person? Because like, okay, the average person, they listen to the Kodak Black album and like, we're talking about young people for the most part, but they listen to Kodak and it's like the beats seem nice. His voice is nice. He's got a few funny lines here and there that stand out to them. He's got some catchy hooks. And a lot of the average rap fan like doesn't necessarily feel the need to take it beyond that, And then like sometimes do you feel like you're sort of missing out on something because when you listen to an album, you are kind of not able to take it in a guttural way?
I mean, I think it's everybody else is missing out on something personally. I mean, I do think I am on a different level, but not in a pretentious, like, you can't be on my level kind of way. I'm on a different level because it's kind of my job to be. I have to be. I can't be any other way.
Right.
I was just at that show with you and I was listening to fucking stuff that, and having a good time that maybe if I had to review it, I'd be like super skeptical of it and, have to like dish out all these critiques.
Right.
But that's just the position that I'm in. That's what I have to do. That's my job. It's really easy to kind of just turn it on and turn it off depending on what, the context is. And, a lot of the stuff that I review, and I've said this in numerous reviews, I don't say it in every review, but like, I say explicitly like, this sounds like it would make way more sense in the fucking club. And lo and behold, it does.
Right.
And the thing is like some music just isn't like headphone music. Some music just isn't like, when you're reviewing something, you're inherently going at it from an analytical sort of angle. And some music doesn't stand up to analyzation.
Right. Like the Playboi Carti album to me is the number one that like, it sounds real good if you're not paying that much attention. But as soon as you have to look at it from the reviewer's perspective, it's kind of like, well, You know, he had a chance to say something interesting here, and he didn't really do it.
That was my exact critique of like that playlist that Drake came out with not too long ago.
Right.
You know, the thing is like it sounds like good sort of wallpaper kind of background kind of music, but like when you actually dive into it, the songs are kind of scant and skeletal. You know, there's not a whole lot of substance to what, you know, is going on there, at least not as much as he gave us on like previous projects like Take Care,
Right.
or, you know, If You're Reading This Is Too Late. You know, there's definitely not a whole lot of substance there lyrically. And honestly, like, I find it kind of weird that it's considered a Drake project, even though there are a number of tracks on there that don't really have that much Drake presence.
Right.
You know,
as opposed to like Views from the Six, where he's still really trying to like make a point about himself. He's really telling you something about himself here.
yeah, exactly. So, you know,
And
again,
that's really what makes it more of a playlist, right? Is that it's almost, it feels different with the intent.
and, you know, despite the fact that I didn't really care for it, again, in my review, I said that, you know, he's almost, in a way, geniusly acknowledging the way that a lot of people are listening to music now. You know, a lot of people are looking for like really passive music. You know, much in the same way that, like, you know, it in a way it kind of functions in the same way that ambient music does, you know, except you can kind of dance to it or just kind of have like a chill vibe to it or just like, you know,
Right.
have a good time to it.
Metal
you
is
know?
kind of like more like mood music in a sense too, because like, you know, people who listen to metal quite often aren't like studying the lyric sheet and remembering all these lyrics that you can't tell what they're saying unless you really pay attention, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it sort of depends on kind of what that mood is that you're going for.
Right.
You know, it's just kind of like you know, there's a lot of black metal that just kind of has like a very hellish, wintry, very
Right.
brittle sound to it.
If me and
you're
you were
just kind
going
of
to listen
listening
to
it
a
for that sound.
yeah, if we're going to listen to an old black metal album right now, like I feel like we would enjoy it from a, you know, a mood perspective. It's cool sounding, but like, you know, it's I'm not on the level of fandom that I'm going to sit there with a lyric sheet and try to figure out what the theme of these records were. But you know, it serves a certain function where it's.
I would depends on
You
the
would
album,
have
though.
to. Okay,
I would,
but
it depends
but
on
that's
the
how
album,
you
though.
choose to take on music, right?
You know,
Like,
I guess like the music would have to be like really good for me to be sitting down there with the lyric sheet.
Right.
Like I was definitely into the lyrics on the new Behemoth record, The Satanist, which is like a very like dark conceptual album, which
Okay.
the lead singer came out with and wrote after he had like a bit of a bout with cancer.
Really?
So like he came back from, you know, like this cancer remission and wrote like, you know, one of the band's best albums.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that was kind of what caused me to get out of like hardcore at a certain point in my life, was just that like I felt like I was just seeing sort of like the same story pan out with all these straight edge bands like over and over again. And after
Sure.
like the third like generation of that, like it was just kind of like, I'm not that interested in this. And like rap kind of appeals to me like sonically more. So I just sort of ended up falling out of it. And I would assume that that effect is almost kind of amplified for something like metal but okay. So do you feel like, were you already that kind of person before you started doing the reviews? Were you already a person who was exhibiting music reviewer-esque traits in the way you were consuming music?
You know, I guess the way that I consumed music before, I just wanted to listen to stuff that was off the beaten path and eclectic and underground. I mean, really kind of like punk was a big turning point for me because it kind of dawned on me that there was this obscure underground version of this genre that I liked, but it was like way cooler and way edgier, and it seemed like the lyrics were really trying to say something, and then it kind of, you know, came in my head, or that this must be true for every genre. You know, there must be some kind of like cool, obscure underground groups that, you know, in electronic music and hip hop, and you know, at the time in the 90s, as you remember, like they played everything on the radio. You know, there was like a lot of great popular mainstream electronic music and rap music and rock music. Like there was no shortage of good music around. But you know, just the fact that there was this sort of more obscure sort of take on this thing that I already knew that I liked, and it was like, in a way, some kind of just more potent.
Yeah.
You know, much in the same way, you know, hardcore is like when you first stumble upon it, when you
Right.
first find it, because like in that style of music, it's kind of incomparable in terms of like size of emotion, you know, in terms of like emotional presence or emotional delivery or aggression, or like, you know, kind of what the lyrics are trying to say in terms of like self-affirmation, you know, in a lot of those bands. You know, you don't quite get that same jolt from, you know, a lot of other genres of music.
Right.
You know, obviously, you know, it can grow old if nobody's coming up with anything new, or, you know, if you want to hear that sound or get that vibe again, you just listen to something old that you know you already liked or played a significant role in your life and kind of hit you first.
Right.
But you know, I've always kind of like wanted to hear kind of obscure stuff. I've always wanted to hear like, you know, something new, something refreshing. And I feel like that is very much still the way that I listen to things. I definitely was not as analytical as I am now, for sure. But, you know, I was still picky, though. I was still kind of picky, but maybe not as much as I am now because I've heard so much stuff. But still, though, I feel like that sort of just drives me more to find something I do like, because since I've started, I really haven't. Actually, since I've started, I've only gotten better at finding more stuff that I like. Okay. You know, and actually, like, you know, while it can sometimes feel like, you know, there's nothing new and who's going to come up with something new and, you know, everything's been done. You know, there's always like a moment when I find some kind of Bandcamp that somebody throws me, or I find some SoundCloud, or, you know, miraculously somebody who I know at a label recommends something to me, like, hey, we just signed this new artist who's doing something kind of cool and off the beaten path. Or, you know, even I've done a few tours, speaking engagement tours down in Australia, and it's funny how much music over there is so unique and weird, and they're completely doing their own thing out there that's totally separate from what we're doing. Like down there, the music scene, like there's a little bit of hip hop, but like it's so not a cultural force down there.
Right.
And as a result, like the flavors and the sounds of rock music and psychedelic music and even electronic music are just like way different and way weirder. Like I feel like because those genres still have room to kind of grow and flourish down there, some of them have kind of mutated in ways that they haven't over here.
Right.
So in a way, like, you know, if you want to listen to maybe some cutting edge rock music, you got to kind of look at Australia, because again, they're sort of like separate off doing their own thing. And like the way that their radio stations work, where they have to play like new stuff, they have to play cutting edge stuff, they have to play local music. Like
they have to, right? Legally in Australia,
They have to play like the, you know, the government radio stations. They have to be playing local new Australian music for so many hours a day.
Right.
And the college,
pretty cool.
And the local stations and the college stations down there are pretty big too. You know, like the community supports them because they are like a pretty significant part of the community and like spreading the word about music in the area. Because they sort of have that support system, like there is some like really weird, cool stuff going on down there. So, you know, I'm always interested in hearing kind of weird, new, cool things, as I said. But again, you know, definitely not as analytical as I am now.
See, it's weird for somebody like me because my gumption is to just, you know, listen to trap rap and to listen to rap in general. And, you know, I listen to stuff that's sort of outside of the trap category. But for the most part, you know, I tend to be a person that wants to listen to, you know, 800 different rappers from Chicago this year to try to figure out what's up with them. And were you, you know, when you were into punk and stuff, were you the kind of guy who wanted to have a fucking 7-inch from every single?
Yeah, I wanted to hear all the punk bands.
Right. But so you weren't listening to Beyonce at that time?
Like months ago, I had to at one point just like, you know, go into a external hard drive and just delete like hundreds and hundreds of like punk songs that I just randomly like, you know, downloaded and listened to. And, you know, it's funny, like going back to a lot of it, I'm like, man, so much of this shit sounds the same.
Oh yeah, dude.
You know, but the thing is, at the time, it was just all like so unique. You know what I mean? But now, but of course, like, you know, I still love the stuff in that genre that stands out to me.
If you picked up a copy of Maximum Rock and Roll and you listened to every single band in it, you couldn't tell the difference between any of them.
Sure.
In my personal opinion, and I used to actually try to read that shit just because I was sort of fascinated by the writers trying to like describe the music as anything other than like, oh yeah, this sounds like the other 7-inches I listened to before this.
Yes.
No offense to the punk community. That's just sort of what kind of got me out of it.
Yeah.
So when it's like, oh, hip hop is so big, hip hop destroyed rock, I'm like, yeah, because on a personal level, it almost like offered such a variety of sounds that it sort of made me less interested in rock.
You know, honestly, like the thing is that hip hop is going to paint itself into a corner just like every other genre of music. But the thing is, like, hip hop, especially right now, sort of that visceral, aggressive, kind of rebellious vibe that we're talking about, like that's going to live on because that transcends the music itself. That next generation is going to have, you know, a fire in its belly, and it's going to have an anger, and it's going to have sort of an unhappiness. It's going to have something that it
with
wants
the status quo, and they're going to say, look at all this popular rap shit.
It's going to have something it's sick of, and that's going to manifest itself into something else. You know,
that's
like these kids today, their parents are cool, and they listen to Sonic Youth,
right?
And you know, that's not what they want to rebel.
A very small percentage of like Lil Pump's like 14-year-old fan base, I think their parents are listening to a Sonic Youth. But I'm hugely in favor of that dynamic unfolding. Exactly.
But that's the thing. It's like listening to something like Sonic Youth isn't weird or rebellious anymore. You know, it's like,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
your parents are hearing about, you know, the new Thurston Moore album on NPR. You know, it's not like, you know, it's not a young thing anymore.
Right.
You know, surely there are kids that, you know, still like rock music. You know, a lot of them watch my channel. But you know, it's not the new trend. It's not the prevailing thing. You know, I like now though that it seems like there are less rules. I mean, surely there are trends, but it seems like if you do kind of want to be free to go off and do your own thing, you can. You know, it's really easy to. You know, while rock music again may not be the prevailing thing, there's still plenty of bands out there making rock music. So you know, there's certainly a lot of new bands to listen to if you want to hear a new band. There's certainly you know, a lot of older records to listen to as well. You know, I think, you know, part of the problem with rock music kind of stagnating is that unlike hip hop right now, and maybe rap will get to this point one day, but unlike hip hop, rock is really obsessed with its past. Really obsessed with its past.
Hip hop hates its past.
Hip hop sort of wants to beat up its past, you know, but the thing is, it's not like there's not voices in the community trying to change that sort of prevailing trend though. You know, there certainly are. You know, but a lot of rap music and a lot of punk music, scratch that. A lot of rap music in this decade ignored sort of the rules and ignored the tradition and sort of broke with tradition in this decade, much in the same way that punk and hair metal did in the 80s.
So now we're arriving at your Lil Yachty is the new punk rock video.
So it's not like rock has ever been beyond, you know, sort of being in a position where it ignored or it shut down or it threw away its past to create something new. You know, it's not like rock has never done that. I'm saying at this specific time in rock music history, there are very few musicians who aren't trying to do something purposefully that's already been done because they want to create some kind of nostalgia.
Right.
Whether that be a Jack White who wants to do a little bit of blues rock, or you know, Slaves that wants to sound like some kind of reinvented version of the Sex Pistols, or you know, another band that wants to sound like the umpteenth version of Joy Division that we've heard again and again and again. There are very few bands out there that are truly trying to do something brand new, and even when they are, there's not a huge audience for it. You know, there's certainly, if I go through my review catalog, I can name probably dozens of rock bands who I think are doing something totally refreshing and really different. But the thing is, like, again, the audience isn't quite there for it because, again, I think that rebelliousness and that drive to do something different and that drive to
through rap,
throw off the status quo, it's being manifested there.
Yeah. There was that like gigantic EDM explosion of a few years ago where it was sort of like,
which seemed like it was going to go on forever.
Right. And there was sort of like a weird moment where I sort of started to feel like, oh, for the first time in my life, like rap music seems like it might be like unseated as the leader of what was big in the culture and everything. And now I feel like there's been a big element of people pulling back away from that, and a lot of that is these people being driven away from like EDM and pop music and being driven into the arms of rap because there's so many sounds being offered that those people can kind of find what they want out of rap, right?
Now, the thing about EDM and a lot of that stuff is that you know, while there are a lot of good artists and people, you know, in that community who watch my show, you know, ultimately to the audience, a lot of it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
You know, there's nothing sort of like, as far as like emotional significance that they pull from any of it.
It's a Molly soundtrack.
It's just a soundtrack to something. Yeah. It's just a soundtrack to a party, which, you know, is totally fine.
Shout out Lena the Plug. She knows.
If that's what you want to do, it's completely fine. You know, it's like there's nothing wrong with like an album or a piece of music that serves a purpose, you know, or is functional, you know, to just like kind of elicit a mood or something, you know. But the thing is, like, people aren't listening to that in the same way that they do a Kendrick Lamar record, where they're trying to establish some kind of emotional connection to what's going on,
right?
Or, you know, like find some kind of hidden or deeper meaning or something.
Well, that's another thing about rock music too, is that like all of the conversations about like society on any kind of mainstream level in terms of politics and everything, that almost exclusively plays out through rap. Like it would be cool if we had like, you know, a rock movement that was stemming from, like the horrible political climate that we're in, and we haven't necessarily seen that, right?
No, not right now, I wouldn't say. I mean, there are a couple, but it's not like a significant thing.
I would like to see that narrative come up.
I would like to see it come up as well. There are a few artists out there who are, but it's not it's not a big thing, and I think it might although actually I think a couple of the new Arcade Fire tracks, I mean, despite the fact that I think they're not good, are a little more political. So were the new LCD Sound System tracks, but I didn't like those either. I thought those were terrible.
But to see a band, like an emerging new band that's maybe associated with a local scene and that has like a distinct like anger based on politics, seems like an open lane for some band.
I guess the weird thing about it is that I feel like we had this after the 90s when indie blew up in the 2000s. I feel like that almost kind of brought in a weird kind of apolitical era for rock music,
right?
Where you had like kind of the Arcade Fires and the Modest Mouses and the of Montreal,
and it was just so pretty,
and it was very pretty and it was very fun, but like there wasn't a message behind it, And then you had sort of like the late era punk bands and pop punk bands who were sort of doing the whole rock against Bush thing. That message was definitely playing out there, but the thing is, like, nobody really looks back on a lot of that stuff nostalgically. It's the indie boom of that era that a lot of people look back on nostalgically.
Right.
The Interpols of the world and everything, and the Deer Hunters.
And that was the last time I cared about rock music too, pretty much, was like that MGMT 2009-ish era.
All that stuff, like, really apolitical, like not a strong political message.
It just sounded really nice. It was just straight pop music when you really think of it today. It's just straight up catchy songs that are kind of cute and nice. I don't give a fuck about who's in the band. He's got a nice little English accent. I'm talking like the Arctic Monkeys. I probably had some songs on my fucking playlist from them at that time.
Sure, absolutely.
I don't know why. I had a girlfriend at the time that was more into like indie and stuff, so I guess that probably was driving me to even be aware of that kind of stuff too. Which I don't have. I don't really have. She listens to John Mayer once in a while. It's about. I'm not going to say I'm really like influenced by it so much.
Got it. The thing is, like, once you have that long, like almost like decade-long period of like apolitical rock music, it's kind of hard for the genre to come right back and just be like, okay, we're gonna get back on our political shit. Because honestly, I feel like that narrative has to kind of be fresh in people's minds for it to like continue to be a thing, continue to be a trend.
And it's kind of hard for me to imagine like rock bands being able to do the super political thing without coming off as kind of corny. I think like Anti-Flag, and then I think like no, like the people don't want that right now. But there's not a lot of political music in general because it's not like we're really looking at that many big rap groups or rappers that are like really like big and honed in on social issues. Like, yeah, you got like a J. Cole who, that's like a pretty central part of what he's talking about, but it's like even as big as he is, or Chance is talking about stuff like that, but it's certainly not like a central part of, like those almost seem like exceptions when you consider
I feel
most
like
big rappers.
Response to that is not so much to be political, but kind of try to elicit kind of this general sense of positivity in the rap community.
Which
I feel
nice.
like that's kind of his way of kind of combating that, and it's not sort of the positive sound that's just like. It's positive by means of ignoring what's horrible. It's like, let's try to be positive in light of what's horrible.
Well, Chance like turns to the church, and like his stuff is very like gospelish, and that's like really what, like when you think about the black community and you think about church, it's like they are in shitty times quite often throughout our country's history, and they end up sort of running to the church as a result because they don't want to face the reality of how shitty their existence might be, right?
Or it just kind of gives people an understanding or a way of making sense of why things are shitty. Which I think can have a positive outcome, can have a negative outcome depending on how you interpret sort of religious texts. Which I think kind of the sliding spectrum of that I think is exemplified on transitioning from To Pimp a Butterfly to Damn, because you have on To Pimp a Butterfly, you have a record where, literally one of the biggest songs on there is All Right, which is, quite frankly, just, directly put, as long as God has us, we're going to be all right. This new record, there's so many themes of, hey, like I'm trying to be religious, I'm trying to do all this stuff in the name of God. Why are things so shitty even so? Shouldn't God be having my back, just like I said on that song from the last record? Because I don't feel like that's the case. And that's where you kind of see some of those narratives coming from the Black Israelite community on the album, where he's talking about, the reason that things are shitty is because we're not on God's path, so he's punishing us until we follow it properly.
But do you really believe that Kendrick is now like subscribing to this really like sort of.
I really don't know, honestly. You know,
Yeah, because we haven't heard him talk about that. It's just in the music, right?
The thing is, like, we don't hear him talk all that often. I mean, it's like some of the interviews I remember him doing around Section 80 and Good Kid, Mad City, like, turned out really controversial for him because he was saying things like, I don't think voting is good, or, you know, my grandmother told me that the world is going to end soon, and blah, 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 blah.
Right, okay.
And quotes like that,
really
I think, kind of, you know, had some bad backlash for him.
And probably turned him off the press in general. Because
although, you know, he has done some interviews for this new record over here. He had that, you know, kind of fluffy Zane Lowe piece.
Oh, God. Yeah, I'm not really trying to hear Zane Lowe these days. No offense. I don't really know where he came from necessarily, but typically he does like the Apple Music puff pieces that are just...
Yeah. But that's the kind of thing you can't expect, like a gritty sort of, you know, kind of conversation with him.
Music.
Although he had that conversation with like with Rick Rubin that was kind of interesting.
Was it
Kendrick? He had a bit of a sit down with Rick Rubin, and they talked about a lot of stuff, which was pretty cool.
Right. Yeah, but do you think that at a certain point somebody like on his team said like, "Hey Kendrick, like your career will be better if you just kind of don't"?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, or just avoid talking about X or Y or Z, because there are so many artists out there who can't seem to not put their foot in their mouth, and you know, their careers like really suffer because of it.
Yeah. Speaking of great artists, there was like and great art forms. There was an Ian Connor tweet that I saw one time where he said something like, Kanye told me never talk about politics publicly, and then that like 6 months later, you see Kanye come out and like endorse Donald Trump and like completely just do all this off the wall shit. And I'm then thinking about Kanye telling Ian Connor that, and just thinking Kanye is like fully aware of like how bad it's gonna get with him if he talks about politics publicly, because he's probably like a raving conspiracy theory. Like we've heard him in interviews, and like, but he doesn't typically go in on like politics so much. But you can imagine if he did, because then we see him meet up with Trump, and we're like, oh, this is what happens when he actually is honest about his political beliefs with us.
Sure. No, I mean, you know, honestly, like at the end of the day, I feel like we need to. I feel like with musicians and artists that people praise, like we kind of, it's a bit of a halo effect. You know, you assume that because they make great music and we really kind of like them as people, we sort of project onto them these good things that we sort of value ourselves. Like, wow, this person must think this and this person must think that, and they must be like a really good person, and so on and so forth. Or, you know, they must agree with me on all these things because I like their music so much. When like, and honestly, that extends to even people like me. Like, you know, I've talked about, you know, my politics and online on numerous occasions, and it's actually pretty funny that, you know, how many people that, because they feel like they identify with me because we like the same record, or I've turned them onto a record, they're surprised to hear me say like, hey, like it really sucks that we have tens of thousands of people who die every year because they don't have access to healthcare. And, you know, and it's really funny, like the fact that I review so much music, I have people like from across the political spectrum like following me all the time, you know, like from people like, this girl hit me up once and said, hey, this like really like huge anarcho-capitalist guy who 3D prints guns is like a really big fan of you. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing. That's nice. And then, you know, and then also it's like simultaneously when I make fun of, you know, somebody like Anita Sarkeesian, for example, like all these SJWs will come out of the woodwork to be like, what the fuck is wrong with you, you sexist piece of shit? So, you know, I don't really vibe with either side of that spectrum.
Right. Well, it's weird because if you come out and do anything that sort of puts you on a similar plane to the alt-right, then you're alt-right these days. Like having a word to say about Anita Sarkeesian is like, that's neo-Nazi category these days.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, you might as well be Hitler.
Right. You know, and you know, there's something someone said about me the other day where they're like, I just looked at your timeline, and in the past 2 days, you have 2 different tweets where you're criticizing women. And I'm like, okay, well, probably within that same span of time, there was like many more tweets of me criticizing men. And it's like, I don't personally feel like I have anything in particular against women. Like one of the tweets was me insulting Cardi B's music career. So to me, that's a pretty...
Which I've done that too.
It's a pretty rational opinion to hold.
I think so.
Cardi B is trash.
It's not really a radical opinion.
Right. Cardi B is on the cover of Fader, so she does have at least some influencers apparently. Sure. Good for her, because I did not see that happening.
Yeah.
But don't that annoys me?
Proud of her.
And you'd have to assume that it would be the exact same effect. Like if I just so happened to have like 2 critical tweets about like Muslim Americans or something, that
Possibly.
it's just you just get cooked for it. Do you feel like you are at risk and that you often are sort of lumped in with some sort of like conservative or right wing movement online just because you don't toe the line in terms of being a social justice warrior?
Yeah, because I mean, well, to some and only with some people, honestly, I think the way to sort of look at it is, on the internet, especially, the squeakiest wheel gets the oil, and the thing is, like, a lot of these sort of super alt-right or these super left-wing sort of political points are very much clickbait online.
Right.
They generate a lot of traffic. They generate a lot of money for websites. They generate a lot of conversation on social media, which only means more money in Twitter's pocket at the end of the day. So the thing is, your average person probably isn't too deeply into either side of the spectrum.
Right.
So it's like when people are fucking pissed off at you about that shit, especially if, I'm in a position where, somebody who, is a liberal political writer who thinks I'm, a sexist who writes for BuzzFeed, literally has no impact whatsoever on whether or not I come out with a review tomorrow and it nets as many views as it's going to net.
Right.
Personally, I don't really feel like my politics are all that controversial in the grander scheme of things. I mean, I'm a Bernie Sanders voter.
Right.
Obviously there are economic issues that I'm very much to the left on, but as far as like, social issues, I'm very much like sort of more on the libertarian set in terms of just like let people just fucking be and just like chill. You don't need to like doctor or sort of like micromanage other people's speech and expression and how they want to conduct themselves, as long as they're not hurting anybody or impeding on anybody else's rights or speech.
But now the line is like, if you are not a Marxist, then you are essentially like you are part or encouraging the system that then creates classism and racism. So if you are conservative in any way, then you are in favor of the system that then creates systematic oppression.
Yeah, and let me just put out there, Marx is trash. And,
yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Marx is trash. Far left communism is garbage, and it's for children who don't know how to function in the real world.
It's for college students.
And again, that's not to say that the world isn't fucked up and that capitalism is perfect. I think that capitalism is something that I think just completely unreined, uncontrolled, unregulated capitalism is just as destructive as, hey, let's have the government control every aspect of the economy. Both sides are totally retarded. And basically it's kind of an example of, political horseshoe theory. Like, you talk about how the far, far, far left, think of the political spectrum, not in terms of a straight line, but more of a horseshoe. And you have the far, far, far left being very, very close to the far, far, far right, because those are the two ends of the horseshoe.
Right.
Really it's more like the gradual, the center left or the center right or the center that actually has, is farther away from sort of those negative parts of sort of the political spectrum.
Right.
They basically it's just kind of exemplified that they have more to do with each other than they would like to admit. And the thing is, like, the far left and the far right, as much as they might disagree with on a lot of things, like ideologically or socially, they both have authoritarian tendencies.
And they both believe your identity should dictate everything about who you are as a person.
Absolutely.
Like that's what Richard Spencer and Tariq have in common, is that they both believe that race is the most important thing that governs everything about your existence and what your existence on Earth is going to be,
and what you think, and what kind of person you are, and all
and they're
that.
both horrific racists. It's just that Richard Spencer knows that he's a racist.
Oh yeah, he knows that he's racist, but depending on where he's interviewing, he will not admit it, because saying he's directly kind of a racist is bad PR for him, and he wants he wants his movement to look good. He wants it to look squeaky clean.
Right.
When in reality, he's just a douchebag.
Yeah, like there's actually like an old podcast that I'm kind of always like not stoked on the idea of somebody digging up, where I was discussing Richard Spencer with somebody, and my opinion of him at that point had sort of been based on an interview that I had seen of him, where he sort of like presented like a more cleaned up version of how he probably really is. And then I followed him on Twitter, and I think the one thing that really stood out to me was he was watching the Super Bowl, and he was like talking about the New England Patriots as if they were like the white supremacist football team, despite the fact that the majority of the people on the team are black. And he had like a whole list of reasons too of why the Patriots were, if you were white, why you should be rooting for the Patriots. And it was somewhat compelling, but I was really impressed by his ability to racialize like a sporting event that is by and large a bunch of black guys playing the sporting event. And that doesn't seem too dissimilar to me from the way that people on the extreme far left and a lot of the activist community sort of seem to see the world. And we were discussing this before, is that there's sort of like this assumption that like the extreme far left activist scene speaks for the average, hip hop fan, which is completely
really
not
speaks
true.
For the average anybody.
Right. But you see that where a lot of that like really crazy extremist leftist stuff is sort of like presented as if it's somewhat mainstream in music or just in youth culture.
The true irony of it is that much of that whole political scene is a bunch of privileged white people on Tumblr thinking that they speak for black people.
For sure.
When black people are just as capable of being dynamically political, philosophically, and ideologically as just any other race of people. There are tons of conservative fucking black people walking the planet.
And you look at Trump, who's voting for Trump, and it's like in a lot of even fairly liberal markets, you're looking at like 30% black people or 25% black people voting for Trump, despite every reason why you might not want to vote for Trump if you're a black person.
Despite every reason not to, he netted way more Latinos and way more black voters than Romney did. Despite the fact that Romney didn't have sort of that controversial sort of element to him, despite the fact that he didn't have that past.
Right. Which is to say that there is a huge diversity amongst opinions amongst black voters, and when they're voting with their money or with their tastes as well.
But the thing is that it's almost like there's a cannibalization process or an excommunication process for anybody who doesn't fall in line with that. Like there's that YouTuber Blair White. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Which one's she?
She's
the fat shamer.
No.
Oh no. Okay, the trans one. Yeah.
But
she's sort of
the transsexual community fucking eats her alive because of some of her opinions. So that's an example. Another example is that "Dear White People" video that MTV put out.
Oh, right.
Where they and not that the white people aspect of it is one part of it. What really kind of boiled my blood about it is the part where they talk about Kanye. And, they just like throw this quick shot at Kanye where they're like, you can have Kanye, white people. You know what you did, Kanye.
Removing his blackness because of who he's voting for. Exactly. Yeah, it's terrible.
Like, you could say somebody's not black anymore just because he did something that you don't like or you don't agree with politically. As if blackness is a political ideology.
Right. And that's what identity politics is all about, is like completely placing like your opinion should be completely in line with who your identity is, and you shouldn't be able to stray from that in any way. It's scary stuff.
And, that's also to say that, because blackness is a political identity and it's not just, sort of the race that you were born into, that whiteness is also a political identity. So because you're white, you must be conservative. You must be racist. You must be this. You must be that. You must like have something in common with Richard Spencer.
Right.
Like honestly, to go back to the horseshoe theory thing, I don't know if you saw like all of those videos. Like I think it happened in Berkeley, California, where all like the Trump supporters and all like the Antifa people like started fighting each other in the street, and the cops just like hung back. Like that's just like the most genius way to handle the situation. Like I would love to see like a Hunger Games type scenario where honestly like, and I wouldn't even say it's inhumane, because honestly you're giving them exactly what they want. Like all those alt-righter guys would want nothing more than like the opportunity to just like have a slugfest with like,
that is like exactly why they're there.
That's exactly what they want. And that's exactly what the people on the opposite end of the spectrum too. They would love nothing more than just like be in a cage match with like a bunch of KKK members.
Right.
So it's just like, just let them do it. And whichever one wins, just like take all the wall money and just wall off like one state in America and just like, pay to have everybody relocated, and then just have whoever wins just live there,
right.
And just like gate them off, like build the wall, and they can only just like live there for the rest of their lives.
I support that. We should give them like Boise, Idaho or something,
Sure.
Just a little chunk of land for whoever wins the battle.
Yeah. Whoever wins the battle. And listen, I don't have a preference for whoever wins the battle. It's just like whoever wins, and they can have their like little separate utopia because, all the, they paid for it with their bloodshed.
My favorite thing with Richard Spencer though is that he wants to establish like a white ethno state.
Exactly.
And I often just wonder.
Fucking at this point,
It's so funny.
At this point in 2017, that's such a retarded pipe dream.
Okay, yeah, because
like,
there's so many questions like where is this going to take place? Who the fuck would want to go live somewhere with like 40 other dudes from a message board?
Exactly.
You know what's the business element of this going to look like? Like it's I probably should look more into what his answers are to those questions.
Like, listen, you know, honestly, like when I think about that, you know, it's like that whole idea, like. Has he ever been to a place that's painfully white? Like,
Right.
I would never go to Portland because it's painfully white. I would never go to I would never hang out or live in like Providence, Rhode Island because it's painfully white.
But do you think Richard Spencer would kind of dig Portland? I don't think that he would really care for it too much.
That's what I'm trying to say
Yeah.
here. Have you thought about like what a
Right.
painfully white culture is? Like, think about like Denmark, for example. Like, so fucking white, but they're incredibly liberal over there. You know, it's like that's not his vibe at all.
Right.
You know, it's like, so, you know, like it's not like just because if you isolate white people and get them all into a spot where, you know, it's like 99% white, that that is naturally going to kind of coalesce into the sort of the ideology that you think,
Right.
you know, people should have, you know, and that's sort of like, it goes back to the same thing of like, well, you know, black people should think X.
Right.
You know, Richard Spencer's making this very same mistake. He's thinking if you get all the white people together in a place,
That they're all
and,
going to agree on everything.
that they're all going to agree on everything. You know, like look at the fucking IRA.
Right.
You know, like how that was such a huge thing in the UK, and that was like such a destructive, you know, sort of like, you know, really ugly part of their history. And it's like, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, what are you guys all fucking fighting about? You know, you're
Right.
all fucking white, you're all Christian. You know, it's like, you know, and again, not to say that they didn't have their gripes and that they didn't have their reasons, and that, you know, that point of turmoil in history, you know, didn't sort of have a cause or, you know, a purpose.
Right.
But you know, just to blatantly assume that that if, you know, you get rid of everybody who's not white and get all the white people living under one roof, that's just going to be peace and harmony.
They're going to sort shit out. Yeah.
Like, you know, white people, you know, during medieval times, like, you know, killed each other, you know, by the sword, you know, mercilessly, like for hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's what I think a lot of people seem to miss out on, is that if it wasn't race, you know, being used as this dividing line, that it would be something else, and then in an all-white community or place that they would find something else to sort of use as their dividing factor, whether it's class or...
Absolutely.
You know.
Because there needs to be somebody to blame your problems on, whether it's a different race of people, or whether it's a different class of people, or whether it's somebody from another country, or, you know, people who speak a different language. I mean, you know, you know, or whether it's immigrants coming over or something, you know, and sort of impacting things. You know, like at one point when my grandfather immigrated over here from Sicily, you know, like to be an Italian was not necessarily a bad thing, but you were an outsider. You know,
Right,
you weren't
yeah.
necessarily
Exactly,
an American.
yep.
You were a newbie. You know, and the thing is, like, and now all those people who came over here, you know, many of whom, you know, did their best to Americanize. Like, my father tells me that when he grew up, you know, they would avoid, you know, the family would avoid talking Italian to the kids because they just wanted them to speak English and be American, because they remember coming over here and having a hard time, you know, sort of getting along because they were looked at as outsiders, you know, because they just came over here. So, I guess that point being, you know, it's now at this point, you know, it's like whether you're Italian or Irish or Polish or whatever, you know, it's like you're just fucking white. You're not looked at as those separate labels, you know. But it's when I used to work at a pizza place, you know, my boss, who was European, you know, would talk about the French and talk about this and this and that, whereas as if it's like, you know, these
Sports teams.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, whereas like to over here in America, it's like if you're white, you're white. You know, I don't think of you in terms of a German white person or a French white
Right.
person or
it would
whatever.
never
You're
occur
just
to me in
white.
a million years to ask you like what your ethnicity is, and it doesn't interest me at all that I come from a specific ethnicity. Like, I so don't relate to being a French Canadian in any way.
A certain subgenre of whiteness.
Yeah, when people ask me what my ethnicity is, it's almost like hard for me to remember, because I'm just so used to being like, you know, I'm white. Like, that's what people have been saying to me my whole
Honestly,
life. I
didn't
no.
I didn't even know what it was until recently. My wife and I did one of those 23andMe things.
Right.
And I found out that despite the fact that, you know, grandfather Sicilian, and we grew up in a very sort of Italian-themed kind of household. My grandmother was French-Canadian, and I know on my mother's side, it was very French as well. But actually, I had more, I think, British and Irish sort of lineage than Italian, and even more than French. Sort of they link together like a few different ones. And I guess far back in my mother's lineage, I had a little Native American and Middle Eastern. I don't know where that came from. I mean, probably they lived up north in Canada, and there's probably some Native American person in Canada far back in my lineage on my mother's side.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm also the kind of person, I really don't give a fuck about like where I'm from. I'm from New Hampshire. I don't care.
Exactly.
I don't have like a big 603 tattoo on my back or anything, and I get it. Like when I hang out with like guys from Brooklyn and like they're really hyped on Brooklyn and stuff. And I'm like, that's tight. I wouldn't wear a Yankees hat because I'm from New England. I wear a Boston hat if I was going to wear a hat that said something like that on it, but I just really don't give a fuck. So it's like I care about being from New Hampshire in the same way I care about being white. It's like I don't care. It just so happens that this is how I was born.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hypothetical situation: new Beyonce album comes out tomorrow. You listen to it. You think it's the biggest piece of horse shit you ever heard. You think it's terrible, but the overall maybe the overall consensus in the community is that it's pretty good and people seem to like it.
Yeah.
Do you review it and give it a bad review, even though that that your bad review is basically going to be perceived as an act of racial violence?
Hell yeah, I give it a bad review.
Okay. And
honestly,
but do you have to prepare yourself for the fallout that you sort of know is coming?
No. Just just say what I have to say and just like let it go out there. Because honestly, I feel like at this point I do have enough of a back catalog of reviews that people like know what I'm really about. But there certainly was a point when, I started reviewing more hip hop on the channel that people were like, hey, I think he just doesn't like some of this hip hop because he's racist.
Yeah, right.
But
you don't get that too consistently, right?
Not now because I have so many reviews. Now, if I give a negative review to a hip hop album or a black artist, it's because, somebody says, oh, well, he's just a Kendrick dick rider. And, it's just because Kendrick didn't come out with it, and that's why he gave it a negative review. If Kendrick was on it, he would have given it a 10. Which was really funny because like before I had given To Pimp a Butterfly a 10, sort of the prevailing critique was that I didn't like any hip hop. And now that I liked that hip hop, then it was like, oh well, you only like Kendrick Lamar, even though I reviewed so many more hip hop artists positively.
Right.
But no, I personally I don't worry about that though. But let's say hypothetically that did happen. And there is kind of like this wave of like, well, you must either hate black people or you must hate women because you gave Beyonce a negative review. Honestly, like if somebody's critique is so wildly inaccurate that listen, I don't have an issue with people having an issue with what I say or what I do as far as like the quality of a review. But if you do, like, make it about what I say. Right. Like if your first attack toward a review I did has nothing to do with something I said, I just instantly tune it out and don't take it seriously. Because as long as it's not based in anything that I said, then your claim is just a claim. And honestly, like the more you respond to a claim like that, unless you have something funny or witty to kind of say as kind of like a response, you kind of give it like legitimacy. Oh yeah. Because, people would probably assume, and probably, rightly so in some situations that like, if it wasn't true, it wouldn't get to you, whereas like, honestly it doesn't because it's so far from the fucking reality of the way things are.
Well, like if somebody were to have something to say about me on Twitter right now and I were to see it one way or another and I were to respond, it's like almost the automatic reaction is like, oh, number one, you mad, and number two is like, you're triggered. That's the big one. You're triggered. You're triggered. Yeah, triggered is like huge. Like a lot of like polite discourse has sort of been eliminated by you mad and triggered.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why you don't respond unless you have something funny to say or a way to mock the person who's trying to get at you. Right. Like if you respond in anger or if you respond like even trying to correct the person because it's like maybe sort of inaccurate sort of what they're claiming, like you do kind of give them like the attention that they're craving for, right? Unless you can kind of like play off with it a little funny, it's almost not worth it.
And you sort of have to respect people's right to make a joke about somebody on the internet that they don't like. A lot of times that's how I end up feeling. It's like, all right, well, you don't like me and I think you should like me, my honest opinion. But if you want to call me a racist just because it's like, kind of funny and you're going to get 40 retweets off it, all right, I guess I gotta suck it up. Yeah. Because there's a lot of people I don't like. And it's like, I'm sitting here making fun of Cardi B because I like watched like 3 of her music videos and I thought they sucked. And it's like, even objectively, like if you were to compare it, like her rapping to like some girls I've interviewed, maybe like technically you could say she's a better rapper. I don't really even know. I just like overall get the feel that I don't like her. And I choose to use that as like,
you just get a bad vibe.
I just don't like her. And something, well, actually I like her. I liked her until she started rapping. And now I'm kind of like, well, I don't like you anymore. I liked you when you're kind of funny on Twitter. That was a cool era, but nowadays I don't know. Yeah. Fuck. 1 hour and 28 minutes in.
That's a big interview.
It's not that big.
Oh, okay.
I was assuming this was probably going to hit 2.5.
Oh, okay.
I just feel like we have like enough in common, enough things that we probably should be discussing. But we just went nonstop for an hour and a half, and then it sort of was just like, wow, maybe I should pull back a little and say, like, what are the things that we should be discussing here as opposed to the things that we just end up discussing?
I don't know what we should end up discussing.
Like, what do you think that people want to hear us discuss? How we are the polar opposites of each other, as you were saying earlier?
We were talking about that earlier, because I do think we are kind of the polar opposites of each other in a way.
You're straight edge.
I'm straight edge. We've ended up on different coasts.
Mm-hmm. Even though we're from like 4 hours apart.
Yeah, we're from the same area. I don't know what else separates us.
I mean, well, you do the music review thing, which is it's interesting to me because that's the kind of thing that I very much could have seen myself having ended up doing at like a certain point too. Like I think that if I was 25 and I was working at Foot Locker and I had seen your channel, that I probably would have been like, oh, okay. That's, like I think one way or another I would have ended up doing something on YouTube or just online in general. And then I look at your channel and like I've always like looked at it kind of affectionately because I've always looked at it like, that could kind of have been me. Like I could have seen myself ending up in that sort of a role.
I feel like the same way. I'm kind of looking like at what you're doing in terms of just like the store and everything. I feel like that's something that I felt like I wanted to do at one time.
Yeah.
Well,
I think just in terms of like, doing interviews with like emerging artists. That's something you totally could do.
Interviews versus reviews. I feel like you're a little bit. Is he a little bit more of a free spirit? I would say I would say he's a little bit more of like down here, whereas I'm like a little more cerebral.
She's not going to pass judgment on me. She knows she'll backhand her as soon as I get
home. That's not a judgment at all.
Just kidding. I don't hit women.
That's not a judgment at all.
Right.
I would say it's both, though. That's the thing. Like, I don't think you're just one.
She thinks I'm cerebral and I'm funny.
Yeah. Nice. Which one prevails though?
Well, he's got a more analytical personality in my mind. Like it makes sense that he ended up doing what he does, in my opinion, because I look at what you do and I don't know if I could handle the rigor of having to just, form opinions like this and structure my opinions into that. I look at what you do, and I've said this to a couple of different music critic people where I've said like, I really respect what Anthony does because I could not imagine myself doing that and being able to actually do a good job of it. Like, which I follow this up immediately after saying like, oh, I think I could essentially like kind of have ended up doing what you're doing or whatever. And these music critic people, for the most part, seem to be like, I could do that.
Yeah.
I don't do that, but I could definitely do that.
Now, the opposite side of that spectrum is, you're talking about how, you can't handle the rigor of that. Like, there is something about, what were you playing earlier? Kendama? So
Japanese wooden ball and stick game.
So basically, you were talking about how much you were practicing it. Like me, I'm such like a workaholic, and I can't have things like sort of unplanned or sort of thrown up in the air or anything like that. Like I can't handle that. It's not rigor, but I can't handle that. That gives me
you like
anxiety
schedule
or whatever. I like schedule. I like things organized. I like things planned out. I like to fucking get stuff done and fucking kill it. And just fucking dominate the situation.
Yeah, see, there's a balance of that with me where I do like having a nice strict schedule that because in a lot of ways having a strict schedule is what's going to make you the most productive.
Absolutely.
Certainly in terms of what you're doing. My problem is that a lot of times the most productive thing for me to do in terms of the future of my business and my career and my social life and everything is to leave the house at 3:00 in the morning and go try to get a little pump interview because he's geeking off Molly.
Yeah.
Which is weird because that to me, leaving the house at 3:00 in the morning to go hang out in the studio, and shout out to Lena the Plug for tagging along with me. That seemed to me is like I didn't want to do it. I wanted to go to bed. And I was just like, I'm going to do this because that's how serious I am as a podcaster, is that I'm going to go get this shit at 4 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was.
Yeah, somebody hits me up and they're like, hey, dude, Death Grips just dropped a new album at 4 a.m. I'm like, fuck you, I'm going to bed.
But you got a few days.
I'll listen to it in the morning.
Yeah.
Or if even somebody was like, hey, man, Death Grips is down the road and they want to interview you right now. It's 3 a.m. I'm
Right.
like, yeah, bye.
Okay,
I'm going
but
to bed.
okay, if someone if that had somehow, in a hypothetical world, if that had been like Kendrick Lamar hitting me up for an interview, even though that interview would get more views than the Lil Pump interview, I would have had to say no, because there's no fucking way I could interview somebody, you know, like that at 2 o'clock in the morning on that level of like. But with Lil Pump, it's like, that's just like a guy I know, so
Yeah.
it would be whatever. But then the moral of how that story worked
Molly,
out.
so the conversation's not going to be super deep.
I mean, I don't know that I've really seen like a fully sober version of Little Pump in all the time that I've spent with him. It's just that usually he's kind of like on the downers, unfortunately. And so to see him like really up and like ready to go, because actually it's funny, what, like before that interview, or before when I was supposed to interview him like 2 days before that, I had FaceTimed him earlier in the day, and I was like, hey, maybe like take it easy with the Zans and the lean today, because to be honest, you're funnier when you're like really alert, and that might be better for the interview. And he was sort of like,
Imagine
fuck
being,
you.
Imagine being like Little Pump for almost like high for 2 years straight, and then you know you're and then maybe one day you just don't have access to it anymore, and then you kind of have to be sober.
Seen it.
Imagine just like how horrible the world must look.
Oh, and why do it to yourself in the first place? I don't really understand. Like, I mean, I'm the kind of person that, like, you know, I see these rappers in this like permanent zanned out lean haze, and it's like, you know, I love a good lean night, to be honest with you. If the guy comes through and I get a little lean and that's what you're doing that night, I mean, that's an enjoyable night to me. She could tell you I'm having a great time when I'm in that state of mind. But then there's like a thing in my mind that's also like, oh, you cannot do this with any sort of regularity ever. But I've always been good at that. I've always been really good at like, I think as much drugs as I've done and stuff, I've never really felt any degree of like addiction aside from back in the day doing Xanax and not knowing what Xanax was, and that kind of got to me. But even that was like a week. And then I figured out that that was a very bad thing to jokingly abuse for a week.
That might be part of the reason I'm regimented, because sometimes I can't say no to stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just like sometimes it's just like to not even have it on the table. Just be like,
Yeah, but I live in a place too where there's just unlimited access to fuck shit on a nightly basis. Like I literally almost every night I have like friends of mine hitting me up, basically saying, you know, hey, let's go out and drink and do cocaine.
Yeah.
And you know, if and essentially always I was saying no, which is weird because like the people who watch the vlogs or hear me talk on this would think that I'm partying all the time, but it's, you know, it's tough to balance being like extremely productive with also going out and drinking and stuff.
yeah.
It's tough.
Especially when like being at places and being social is a part of the what your job and everything. You know,
That's the thing I've been working on a personal level, is to like be able to go to the rap show, be able to go to the club and not drink, not feel like you have to do anything, because, you know, going to the club quite often in my position might be like the best use of my night in terms of advancing my career. You know, if I can go see somebody or like, you know, go to a rap show, I get to sort of link with somebody, like, you know, because so much of the podcasting thing is just like a straight up like networking challenge.
absolutely.
Which kind of appeals to it to me because, you know, before I thought of all this as like a business or, you know, what I was going to be doing in my future, it was just kind of like I just want to have conversations with people. Like, you know, I was watching your videos before I had any degree of success, and, you know, probably was thinking like, oh, you know, I'd like to meet that guy.
And that's kind of another bit of a polar opposite thing, because I hate showing up to things like that and networking and rubbing elbows. It's just so not me. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just so much more of like a lone wolf type.
Right. It was funny going to that rap show with you just now because I wasn't sure if that was the kind of thing that you would really go to.
It's something, you know, I would go to and I have gone to in the past, but often with those things, I just like go by myself, and it's just like, you know, it's funny. Like people hit me up, they're like, hey man, like, should I go to this show by myself and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't see a problem with that. I do that fucking shit all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and in, you know, at a different time and in a different position, often I would go and, you know, meet other people and just link up and do other stuff afterwards. But, you know, honestly, it's like I never really have had like a problem with just being by myself and just like, you know, just doing my own thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look at, like, you know, I was just in New York at this Trippie Red show, and DJ Academics' intern showed up, and I was like kind of hanging out with her. I was like, why didn't this guy Academics come to this? And she's sort of like, no, he doesn't like going to like, you know, social things really, which makes a lot of sense because there's definitely a lot of rappers that want to beat the shit out of academics. I don't really think of you as so much being in the like club of like where people want to fight you.
No, and honestly, I don't mind being social at
don't
all.
mind
It's
being
just,
beat up?
It's just really a matter of who I want to be social with. You know, it's like I've done a lot of speaking engagements, and I actually love hanging out with people at the show. You know, like who come down because I feel like I can kind of take advantage of the fact that we have this shared interest, you know, because it's like they're there because they're really passionate about music. If they weren't, they wouldn't be.
Right.
You know, but it's like me going to a place, and even, you know, the place that we just went to was great, but like going to an industry event, like I'd rather claw my fucking eyes out.
Right.
Because it's just like, it's so boring. Everybody's just there to kind of jerk each other off. Everybody's there to like, you know, fuck each other, both figuratively and literally.
See, I kind of like going to industry events because I feel like I'm just getting sucked off the whole time. It's just straight up, just like, because everybody who's like an A&R or whatever are just kind of looking at me like, oh, like, and which is weird because I don't really feel like I've done a whole lot to earn it. Like even the interviews that I get like tons of credit for, like, oh, you were so early on this guy. I'm like, yeah, like. You're ignoring the 90 ones that I did along with those 2 that nobody ever ended up giving a fuck about. But, you know, I'll take the credit. But, yeah, I kind of like the industry stuff because I just feel very much like I don't feel very obliged to acknowledge anyone else's existence. I feel like I can just kind of go in there and just sort of like soak up whatever affection people want to throw at me, which is all right.
It doesn't interest me at all because it's not what makes music interesting to me. You know, it's like I'd rather, you know, it's more interesting for me to hang out with people who, again, like watch the show, and not because, you know, they're interested in me, but as much as like I know they're there because they're passionate about music as much as I am. You know, so it's like when they're there, there's kind of like a realness to the reason that they're there, and there's a realness to the reason that they like an album. They're not telling you an album's good because it's in their interest because of their paycheck to tell you an album is good, you know, or like hype up some artist to you or overblow some artist to you because, you know, kind of their livelihood depends on it. You know, they're telling you that, you know, even if I disagree, they're telling you that something is great because they truly found something, you know, sort of special in it that speaks to them, you know, and that to me is interesting. You know, that to me is what makes music great.
So what's your like lifestyle like? You know, like what type of area do you live in? That was one of the things that I saw people in volunteering questions, like the few serious questions. A lot of people being like, ask him like more what his personal life is like because he doesn't talk about what his
and that's very purposeful. I don't talk about my personal life at all. You know, and I guess maybe that's another kind of opposite sort of separate thing. You know,
I'm way out here.
Because personally, it's like,
is that bad?
I just try to keep my personal life off of YouTube because it's like I don't want it to be about me. You know, it's like that's not the point. You know, and the thing is, like, honestly, it's like I've been on YouTube long enough to sort of see so many people who sort of do the whole vlogging thing, and then like maybe 3 or 4 years down the road, like nobody cares about them anymore because that cult of personality fades away because, you know, it's like as a personality you can only interest people so long, you know, unless you have some kind of substance or talent, or you're giving people some other kind of, you know, like sort of something like what we're doing here, you know, to sort of supplement that, the fact that you're letting them in on your life. You know, there's so many people who, on YouTube especially, that subsist simply off of the fact that you're only interested in me as a person because you either think I'm pretty or you think I'm funny or you think I'm whatever. But the thing is, like, that can quickly be replaced in 2 to 3 years when somebody younger or funnier or, you know, on whatever the new wave or edge is, you know, sort of comes through to replace you. Yeah,
that's kind of the plus and the minus for you, where you have a very set specific thing that you're doing, which in a way, when I look at what you do, I think it might feel kind of like a confining in a way because you don't have the option. Well, I guess you do with the second channel and stuff, where you do sort of have the option to just make like a silly video about whatever.
That option, yeah.
You should. Oh God, it would be so funny to just see you do like a straight up vlog and just see like what your version of a vlog was like on the other channel.
Hey guys, vlogging here. You know that I wouldn't be able to do it without like really cynically and just like you know, bullshitting my way through it. You know, there was a time when I used to have my wife in the videos, like maybe giving an opinion on an album.
Right. A few people mentioned that, and you got rid of that.
And you know, we stopped that because like people are really fucking nosy and just like, you know, searching us on Facebook and like trying to find out, you know, things about us, and you know, and also just kind of like the nastiness of the fact that you know, we're an interracial couple, which like you'd figure in 2017 is not a big thing. But you know, they were just like, it became a lot like what we were talking about earlier, kind of this weird, disgusting, and you know, kind of like mimetic demand in the comments that I say the N-word when I'm talking talking about like a rap lyric or when it comes up in an album title.
But
or
that's a
song title or
consistent thing
something.
that people say, like, we want you to say it. See, I don't get that so much.
The thing is, like, it became this really weird distraction because people weren't, so much talking about or paying attention to what I was saying as much as they were like, ooh, look at them as a couple or blah, 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 and it didn't even just become about, sort of our relationship as much as, the sort of the interracial quality of it is just like, well, I wonder what they're like as a couple and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And,
people can't help it in the YouTube comments just let out their most like slipperiest urges.
It's just like not only a distraction, but it's just like kind of weird. And it's something that personally she was uncomfortable with, maybe a little bit more than I was at the time. But
there's a lot of value in being a private citizen.
I think there is.
And I've completely lost touch with what that might be like. And I envy to some degree your wife. And like, I would encourage her that if she, and it seems that you've come to the same conclusion, if she doesn't want to go all in with being a very public person, then she should probably be better off not showing up on the channel, in my opinion. She works a straight
9 to 5, and I tell her all the time, like, hey, if ever one day you just decide that you want to quit and do YouTube, I'll help you get your YouTube career started.
There you go. Same
so
thing,
like
same room, same lighting.
There's always a plan B. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, we'll shoot it from the same exact room.
Yeah. Transition. She does all the same shit.
Transition over to my wife now. But yeah, it's like, there are a lot of aspects of our personal life that we just like would rather keep private just because that's kind of how we are. It's like my YouTube channel isn't about us. I've seen so many people over the years, their lives are just like completely ruined because honestly, like when you let people in your life like that, and this isn't anything against you because I think it seems like people sort of expect and you embrace a little bit of chaos in your life. But there's so many people on YouTube who, especially like, these family vloggers who put their kids in videos. And
shout out Daddy of 5.
Exactly.
Who fucks with you.
Exactly.
Scumbag.
Whereas like in every single video, they're trying to portray like they have this really kind of perfect, happy family life.
Right,
that
yeah.
Nothing bad ever happens.
I've always loved owning that of being like a vlogger who is willing to be like, look at how fucked up and stupid my life is.
Exactly. But
I don't feel like I do it anymore. I don't think I'm a vlogger anymore. I've done like one in the past 2 weeks.
But the thing is, that stuff is going to come out in the video eventually because like life isn't perfect like that, So, I mean, when that happens, what do you do?
Right.
You're either faced with either letting that seep out and, potentially embarrass yourself and ruin your life and even maybe ruin your kids' lives because there's like hours of footage out there about them, which like, maybe once they're 19, 20, 21, 22, they might have an opinion about that. I mean, you probably have a strong opinion right now about whether or not, let's say like
as an 8-year-old,
8-year-old, like let's say like
He's
5 hours of you as an 8-year-old, like leaked online.
Peed his pants.
Exactly. Some
pussy.
Some footage of you peeing your pants and stuff.
That's weird. Yeah.
Would not be a good look.
Smearing your own shit all over your face and stuff as like a 4-year-old. Yeah.
Exactly.
Some sort of like tribal war paint.
And, I've seen like some channels like that where the family vloggers where it's like, I'm surprised that they're not more strategic with their edits because I've like literally seen footage of them with their kids, like with the camera in their face and they're like, can we stop vlogging now?
The Daddy of 5 one, like that, they had clips of them like blatantly not like consenting to being a part of this. And I'm just like, what the fuck are you thinking? See, when I first started vlogging, it was like before I was with this one over here. And that kind of was like part of what drove me to do it. It was like, I got a really fucked up life. I'm fucking banging all these random chicks and like doing drugs and stuff. And I should probably like be a vlogger who's like more open about that stuff. And I was doing it for a while, but then, when it all really kind of came down upon me was like, I basically like some girl tweeted something at me. Basically, I forget what she said, something flirty. And I said something about, let me suck your toes. And she like DM'd me and it was just straight up like, what's up? Let's hang out. I want you to suck my toes. And I'm like, all right, come through. So she like comes over my house. She ain't too great looking, it's like acceptable, I guess. But, I hung out there and like, I'm vlogging the whole time. So I'm putting her in the video and I ended up sucking her toes. And then like, I was just so disgusted by myself when I'm looking at the fucking thumbnail of like.
Really hit rock bottom.
Like that's how I felt. I was just like, what the fuck?
And you documented it.
And I documented the whole thing, and all the comments are saying the same thing that I was thinking, which is like, hey, she ain't so great looking.
Video.
Yeah. And I mean, and
on YouTube.
She didn't even let me smash. I got dome like 2 times. And then like after that, I like hung out with her and I was like, man, maybe it ain't nothing wrong with like, having something a little bit more normal. So now, like, if and that's what's kind of cool too about not vlogging is that if me and her go out and have like a really thoughty night with some other girls or something, then it's like, hey, I don't have to expose myself, which is nice.
Got it.
Yeah. But I might expose myself anyway on Snapchat at least, yeah.
What other opposites can we expose here?
Well, you're vegan.
I am vegan. That is an opposite.
I love meat. I mean, I'm cool. I was vegan actually in high school for a few years, but it didn't really work for me. Damn, she out here drinking wine. I don't know why we're acknowledging her as if she's on camera. Other differences. Well, I'm more of like, a mumble rap connoisseur, whereas you're like over here,
You got blue eyes. I got brown eyes.
That's nice.
That is nice. That is a nice difference.
I wore my hat today because I didn't want people to comment saying like, oh, look at this skinhead rally.
That's true.
That's not really why I wore the hat. I actually just thought that it kind of looked cool with the Sade shirt.
It is cool.
You like it? It says all facts on it, which I think is funny too.
I remember all that very vividly.
See, there you go. Yeah.
That was like the shit back in the day.
This was a hat that a kid sent in, like a fan thing.
Oh, really?
Which I thought, hey,
Pretty cool.
Pretty nice. He
That
sent me a
show
couple
was
of them.
legitimately funny.
Yeah.
Like still even like in retrospect, it was funny. Like very funny for a kid's show.
You watch much TV these days?
I watch like probably more Netflix than I watch TV. And
To me,
honestly,
that's
like
TV.
most of all videos that I watch is YouTube. I still like living and dying by the platform. Like most of all the videos that I watch are YouTube. But like I'm really into Orange is the New Black. Probably more than I should be.
We should get Netflix. I feel like if I had Netflix, I might watch it sometime. We have it?
Yes.
Damn, I never used it. I never even know. I don't even really know how to turn my own TV on.
You used it the other day.
Did we?
That's another opposite. I remember I have Netflix.
I don't know. To me, it's like when it comes to like what's on the TV, there's something about like the fact that it's on the TV that just makes me not pay attention to it and it kind of makes me fall asleep. Like I don't know what it is. YouTube very much is like my attention span, but I don't feel like there's a lot of YouTube channels I'm really that interested in
I feel
anymore.
like a lot of like normal television programming is super boring right now. A lot of the things that I used to watch, I just don't have faith in or don't have as much interest in anymore. Like I'm not as crazy about the newest line of Adult Swim programming. I think Rick and Morty is cool, but like a lot of it, I'm not all that enthusiastic about.
I've
I'm not
never
as
seen
crazy.
Adult Swim. I don't even know what it would be like.
That's totally fine.
Okay.
I'm not as into Comedy Central as I used to be. I'm not really as into, watching the news as I used to be. Like pretty much if I want any and all of that stuff, like I'm usually going online for it because there's usually way more cool alternative comedy going online and in the meme community.
Yeah.
Like, instead of watching Comedy Central, I'd rather spend an hour looking at some motherfucker's Instagram meme page.
Right.
Because like it's so much more hilarious.
I mean,
than watching like the Daily Show try to be funny.
Right.
Post
See, that's
Jon
my
Stewart.
problem is that if I put the Daily Show on, if I fucking hypothetically if I knew how to turn on the Netflix or whatever and I turned on Daily Show, I would then just want to start looking at Twitter. Like I legitimately think Twitter and like memes and like various stuff like that. Like I think that's funnier. I think it's more of the moment. It's very raw and filtered. I mean,
It's more cutting edge and it's more fun.
Yeah, and also it's like easier to take part in it. It's like if I find some funny meme on Twitter, then I could like kind of perhaps weigh in, and that's valuable to me. And in terms of having a popular Twitter account is a good thing that benefits me in the long term. I don't really like think of it that way, but I think it's
And it's like edgier too in like a really authentic way. Like that it's edgy because that person felt like being that way, as opposed to like they thought it would be acceptable for an advertiser for them to say that, or it would be good for ratings.
And that's what I think is funny when I look at somebody like me, you, academics versus somebody like much respect to like Peter Rosenberg or whoever. They're really in a position where if they don't like a major artist, there's like if you're on the radio and stuff, if they don't like Nicki Minaj, if they don't like Rick Ross, it's hugely detrimental to their career as a person who wants to interview and have these people on their show and stuff. So they're really in a position where they're not incentivized to dislike popular mainstream stuff. Literally Peter Rosenberg almost like lost his job and stuff because he basically inferred that he didn't like a Nicki Minaj song on stage at Summer Jam.
Yeah.
Which is, that's kind of weird. It's like in that way, I almost don't even feel like it's really fair to put somebody who's doing YouTube content in the same category as somebody who's like a radio personality, because on average, those people are sort of being forced into a pretty small box.
Honestly, it's like I've had to make the same kind of decisions and sacrifices and kind of go through those same kind of forks in the road too. But it just, it's really just more based on whatever my personal choice is on that path, because I've had interview opportunities and have been on done interview segments that have been like sponsored by big companies, and have had people sort of running production for it, and they're like, hey, what do you think about interviewing so and so? And I'm like, could be a good interview, but I kind of shat all over his last record.
Right.
And they're like, oh, well, we'll try anyway. And then, they came back and they're like, yeah, he doesn't want to talk to you.
Right. And you always wonder too, like if you have a tweet making fun of somebody that has like 800 retweets or something, like does that guy know?
Oh, well, usually there is a response at this point. It used to be back in the day when, there was not a response at all. But now that I have like a verification check, it's almost like a target on your back.
It. Oh, yeah. Because then you're in that verified tab. The one thing I have going for me is that I'm not in that tab yet. Thank God.
People see you in the verified tab, and also like they feel like there's more of like I don't know.
You're more of a real person.
You're more of a real person, and there's more of a chance for them to like kind of start a battle, because honestly it's not even the verified tab, because sometimes when some people just come at me just to come at me. It's not because I've added them or anything, but again, it's sort of like by the mere fact that I become verified, I've become more beefable.
Right, more beefable.
Yeah.
Because I have a friend basically who works in the rap industry, and he's like a very powerful person. And he texted me the other day, and he goes, "Hey, I'm with blank, and it's by far one of the biggest rap stars in the world." And he just said like, yeah, he said that he's seen your YouTube and that he fucks with it. And this is a person who I have completely treated as if they're a living joke on Twitter. Like completely shit upon this person, use them as the butt of a joke. And then this guy's telling me that they said that like they thought what I do is cool. And I'm sitting there thinking like, does he think it's cool despite knowing that I've shit on him, or that people who work for me have shit on him on Twitter and stuff like that? Or does he just not know because he's so big that he doesn't have room in his life to care about that?
Yeah.
And I don't know.
I don't know either. You introduced me to someone earlier at the outside the club who I have probably publicly torn apart like 3 of his features. And I was just like, okay, we're meeting, and it's just like, it is what it is. If you know about those opinions, you know about those opinions. If you don't, you don't,
I got to figure out who this is later, but also, did you get the vibe that they might have known?
No, I didn't,
The deeper they get in terms of like hood shit, the more likely they are to not know, in my opinion. Like the more likely they are to just have not really stumbled upon that. The more street level they are, the more likely they are to have not really.
The more they're not paying attention to some dorky white guy on YouTube talking about music.
But it's super funny because like there's been plenty of times where I've posted like a photo where I've sort of realized that like when you really are around like gangster dudes, but dudes who are not like necessarily like real successful yet, is like if you post a photo with them, like they're going to be the ones who are in the comments on the Instagram photo, like it's not like, because there'll be kids commenting like this dude's a pussy, and they'll be the ones actually commenting like, oh, all right, pull up on my block, you got something to say, like that, which is super funny. Just to me, it's like I'm not fucking out here trying to act super intimidating or whatever, and I would never think of responding to someone in an Instagram comment. If I really was bothered by it, I'd just block them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like I feel like once you start like resorting to like trying to get people to fight you on Instagram, you've lost.
Yeah, it just doesn't go well.
Since I came over here, I've gotten at least like 3 different people on Twitter just being like, "Hey, dude, I know you're in Anaheim. Where are you? Let's fight." Where are you? Let's fight. You're in Anaheim. Let's fight, dude.
And are these like legitimate people, or are these?
I mean, I don't know. I really haven't given them my address to find out. I guess
certainly don't want to do. Yeah.
I guess whether or not they're legitimate would depend on whether or not they would show up if I gave them my address, and I haven't tried that yet.
I would think most of them wouldn't, but I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I've gotten thousands of those over the course of the past year. Probably I got people trying to fight me all the time, telling me they want to shoot me, all this stuff, but I've never once gotten the feeling that it was actually serious in any way.
Like, you're always out and about. There have to be some people that like have said that shit or have thought that shit, and then they see you in person at a club, or they see you in person at a show, and it's like, well, that guy.
I mean, but that's what I want, because it's like there's very few situations in which I'm like not kind of prepared for. Like, oh, if somebody wants to do something to me at that show that I was just at, where I'm with fucking 50 gang members, yeah, okay, cool, let's do it.
I think also the height's probably a turn off too. It's like, oh wait, he's like way taller than me.
But if they knew that I had back problems, they wouldn't be scared of the height. It's useless when you're fucking walking around like a fucking old geezer. I'm lucky that I was able to stand up in there.
I've had back problems too. There we go. We have that in common.
Wow, that's beautiful.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm like a fucking senior citizen though. If somebody wants to fight me right now, it's like, no, like you don't understand. This isn't gonna happen. You gotta wait till later. I got these guys. They're gonna beat you up for me. Trust me, I'm gonna catch you later. Yeah. When's the last time you were in a fight?
When was the last time I was in a fight? Good question.
I don't see you having a lot of like.
I don't think I've been
scenarios
in a fight since like high school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's probably the last time I was in a fight. Yeah, I mean, I haven't. And honestly, like, I was never someone in high school who, I was just always one of the bigger kids. So there weren't a whole lot of people that would just come up and fuck with me, you know? Like, so there was never really a reason to pick on me. You know, even as like, being one of the heavier kids in school, there's like only so far someone can push that, you know, before, you know, you do something about it, at least for me,
Right.
you know? And I know that, you know, my father, you know, taught me when I was growing up not to take any shit from anybody, like about that sort of stuff when I was in school, you know. And I remember one day there was this kid who, you know, this is sort of the sort of vibe that he instilled in my brother and I. There was this kid who was like taking his really long winter hat and he was like snapping it at me, and he was doing it so repetitively that like, you know, the bus driver was like fully aware of it. And then like, you know, by the umpteenth time of him doing it, I just like jumped across this, like the aisle of the bus, and I just like, you know, planted my knees on him, was just like wailing on him. So immediately my little brother, who's riding the same bus as me, you know, ran up the driveway to my father, and he was like, you know, Anthony got in a fight. And he's like, he did. What happened? And he says, well, the kid was hitting him, and then he jumped on him and he started punching him. And he immediately yelled at my brother for not getting involved and punching him too.
Nice. That's tight.
He's like, if he's ever in a fight, you're fighting too. And he yelled at me too. And he says, and that's the same for you.
That's
you know,
dope.
because he's the little brother.
Yeah.
So, you know, I wasn't down for taking any shit like that. You know, and he was a power lifter too, so he had me in the gym like pretty early.
Oh, so your dad was a power lifter. Okay. So there was never any chance of you going down like the fucking Jay Cutler bodybuilding lane. You were always going to be a big, strong guy.
Yeah, no, I was never sort of into that whole thing. And honestly, like I never, it was always a hobby. It was not anything I'd ever wanted to pursue seriously. You know, it actually hasn't even been until like recently that I've been like, okay, maybe I should like actually like, now that I'm getting older, like actually start watching what I'm eating. So, you know, I'm not just like going to the gym, but still being like an incredible fat ass.
Well, that's the cool part about getting into powerlifting, is that there's no real like stigma against, you know, eating fucking hometown buffet after or something. Yeah.
Exactly, because you're just going to go lift 600 pounds.
Yeah. It's like,
the next
well,
day.
you know, yeah, I ate 2 hamburgers, but I'm going to go bench press or deadlift 600 pounds. Yeah.
700. Yeah, exactly.
Did you think that that's kind of like, well, I don't know. I mean, I think that like you being into the powerlifting thing is probably like the most like off-brand thing about you, in that it doesn't seem to like fit in. Because okay, that's the one thing that makes you kind of easy to hate on for people, is that in a lot of ways they feel like you are the perfect embodiment of what a white 30-something-year-old hipster is, and the powerlifting thing is like not probably what they're thinking.
No, absolutely not. No, and like any kind of physical exercise for that set of people.
No, like kickball, like in Williamsburg.
Yeah. If any kind of physical exercise, it's ironic.
Yeah, exactly.
It's ironic somehow.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. No, definitely not. Yeah, that definitely breaks the mold there. And I think the fact that I'm just so regimented and I'm just so kind of like by the book on a lot of things. However, it's not like my plan forever. It's I don't know. I've always kind of been like a very regimented and kind of like well-behaved sort of like young person, but I've always like, you know, but I'm actually like I'm a little looser than I used to be in high school. And, you know, I'm probably going to just go insane when I'm old and just like, you know, become some kind of crazy Hunter S. Thompson weirdo
that would be
who's
great.
like firing revolver rounds into a typewriter.
Do you think that
in
there's
the
a
middle of the
breaking
snow.
point in which you'll just have to like do PCP and like acid and stuff?
I don't know if it'll be so much like a breaking point as much there'll be like an aha, like sort of Office Space kind of moment where I just don't give a fuck anymore. And my dad's actually kind of at that point. Like he worked at a company
PCP point?
for a friend. He's actually been indulging in a little bit of medical marijuana. So
good for him.
shout out to my father.
Hey, I was going to ask that as a side note. Is like we were smoking a lot of blunts in the club earlier. You feel like there might have been a certain contact high involved in this?
Maybe if there is, I don't feel it right now.
Yeah, I mean that was like 3 hours ago. So,
but no, he's he worked for like a buddy's company for a while, and you know, was like was working in sales over there and made a ton of money and just like did early retirement. He just like fishes every day for the rest of his fucking life.
does that appeal to you?
And the idea of just like making a ton of money and then just like totally shutting off and you know, disengaging from any type of responsibility, yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, that totally.
As opposed to now where you sort of have yourself on the fucking hamster wheel where you're just sort of, for a lot of people out there, you don't know what the lifestyle is like as a daily uploader on YouTube. And it is really something because you're really just always going hard. And it's hard for you to get yourself out of that mentality, even for, because in YouTube, if you take a week off, it's a fucking lifetime in terms of how the average YouTuber who makes a business out of making money off ads on YouTube views it.
The way that I've sort of methodically and analytically sort of approached my passion on this topic. I mean, my father wasn't just a power lifter, he was a coach too, and he coached a lot of successful people, and he owned 2 gyms.
Right.
But then it all kind of fell through after a steroid controversy.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was during a time when steroids weren't quite legal yet. So we're talking about a period of time between when you have all these people using it and it's completely okay, but then this transition period where it's suddenly not okay, but the lifestyle and the competition is all still there. Because it's like you still want to be the biggest and you still want to be the best. And I've seen like a lot of him and his friends, and it's like they're not in the best physical shape right now, and not just in terms of like weight or anything like that. A lot of them like literally just like beat themselves to death, tore ligaments, ripped their shoulders apart just to be like the dude who's benching 1001 as opposed to the dude who's benching 1000.
Crazy.
It's
a very bizarre thing to dedicate your life to. It's almost like dedicating your life to reviewing music.
Yeah, I know.
Lifting heavy weights.
Lifting really fucking heavy weights.
Can you see the comparison there though between the two?
Oh, absolutely. It's like I think the thing is like the fact that I've kind of seen things play out the way that they did for him makes me very kind of afraid and very conscious of everything that I'm doing with my personal brand, and just trying to make sure that I don't do anything that's going to create some kind of overnight destruction of what I do, in terms of like, hey, let's like not say anything like really embarrassing or like life destroying on this podcast right now.
Right.
Not that I'm trying all that hard to do that right now because it's pretty much like second nature at this point. But the thing is, like, when there's hours upon hours of footage of you talking online, you have to be especially careful to make sure that none of that footage is like career ending.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure what would be necessarily like career ending for me as like a person who's said and done so many terrible things online.
Like there were definitely some things that like very, very early on in the channel, where I didn't have the grips of how to review yet.
Right.
And I didn't have all of the know-how as far as like the inner workings of every genre and the history of every genre. That if I just came out early on and been like, hey guys, listen, I'm a music writer, but here are like 100 essential albums for any music fan that I have not heard, at all. Like that probably would have just like completely destroyed my credibility and channel right there.
Right. Well,
now,
destroying credibility
point,
is that's pretty easy.
Now, like at this point, it's been almost like 8 years since then, and I've had the time and the foresight and the focus to kind of like make sure that I've done all that groundwork and done all that background work. So I have a better idea of what I'm talking about, and I've heard those artists, and I can draw those comparisons. But like early on, like especially with that first year of videos, like I had almost no fucking clue what I was doing. Yeah.
Do you feel like? Well, I saw a bunch of comments that were like asking about saying the N-word back in the day.
Yeah.
Did that ever happen?
Back in the day, no.
Oh, I don't know. Like they were just somebody saying that you said it on a thing with fans or something. I don't know. I was like,
I don't recall.
Yeah. You probably remember.
I know during a live show once, the title of that Death Grips album, which shall remain unnamed. I did say the title live during a live show once in front of a bunch of fans, and it wasn't a thing or anything. But part of the reason that is that I'm not trying to say it on camera because there will be
memes.
Sort of the memes. People just turn it into a stupid meme, and it's like that's like not really what I think. Not that I think that the word can't be said, but instantaneously that is going to be taken and turned into a disrespectful thing, in my opinion.
Right.
That's the thing. It's like I don't think that word is a meme, know, and I don't think what that word represents, at least for me, is a meme either. And I feel like even though just saying the word for no reason whatsoever, just to say it with no context or no reasoning or anything, not directed at anybody, with no intention other than just to say it. I don't think that's inherently bad or harmful, but I feel like
if you were saying the name of an album.
yeah, sure.
But it would
I
just
feel like to
immediately
do
become
it-
way more complicated than that.
But
Yeah.
I feel like if I did it on video, I'd be facilitating the means of turning it into a meme or turning it into some
Yeah.
bullshit meme, and that's not anything I want to be complicit in.
Yeah. Do you ever feel somewhat? We were having a conversation earlier about you sort of being held accountable for your fans saying or doing certain things, and
Yeah.
being that you have such a big mob of fans who seem willing to make memes about you and do if you don't like somebody, they like to get involved on Twitter and they like to talk to that person and probably tag you in it. Do you ever feel like kind of like your fans, your big motivated army of fans, are kind of a liability for you?
Yes and no. I mean, honestly, it's like I feel like the people who are really in the know and people who are not total morons understand it. Honestly, anybody who's ever had an audience as opposed to an echo chamber knows that when you have 100, 200,000, 300,000 people following you on Twitter,
Subtle shade at certain critics out there is like a lot of them kind of are in an echo chamber, right?
they're they may have 11,000 followers, but they don't have a following. They have an echo chamber.
And 50 people at home with a subscription to the print version.
Exactly. So, because you have an echo chamber, you might be under the impression that you control everything that your followers say because they all agree with everything that you say.
Right.
But in a line of work like mine,
Where you have actually achieved some degree of popularity.
I don't control anything that anybody does. I can only control it insofar as like what we were just saying in regards to the N-word. I can control that situation in that I'm not giving you that material to work with. Beyond that, I can't control what you say to me. I can't control what you say to somebody else who has interacted with me. I can't control any of that stuff. I have had some people, in a very polite and a very friendly way, hit me up in the DMs or take me aside and say, hey, listen, if you disagree with something I've said on Twitter, can you just maybe DM me about it or something? Because when you disagree with me publicly on Twitter, even though it does come from like a real authentic place,
Wow.
I do get maybe 5 or 10 tweets or a bunch of people tweeting at me being like, Anthony Fantano's right or blah, 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 blah. And, just as like a friendly gesture, I'm like, sure, it's
Right.
like if you don't want to be subject to that and we're in the same industry or we're friendly or we're on good terms, I'll pay you that respect. That's totally fine. Even if I do feel like I disagree with you and if I do feel like it's really worth discussing or talking about, I will just hit you up or discuss it with you in private.
Right.
So there has kind of been that situation before where I've paid somebody that respect at their request, and if anybody else listening to this wants to be paid that same respect too, just let me know. I won't ever tweet at you ever again out of fear of somebody who follows me seeing it and responding.
Yeah,
to
everybody
you.
out there, there's a very good chance that I will never tweet at you or acknowledge that you existed anyway. So, good news.
So yeah, there are people out there who think that unfortunately, I can control everything my audience says, and in fact I can't, and people who are living in reality do understand that. So at the end of the day, I don't really feel like it's a liability because honestly, it's like while some people might find it offensive, you can't really pin it on me.
Right.
It's like, and the fact that. And if I respond to it in, as if you can pin it on me, you only kind of give that more legitimacy.
Right.
It's kind of also just like a bit of a guilt by association thing because there are people who are sort of in the skeptic community on YouTube, like Blair White, for example, who we talked about earlier, who, I've had discussions with and I've interacted with publicly on Twitter. I don't agree with her on everything. It's like, for one example, this past election, so she claims, she was a Trump supporter, and that's very much like not my vibe at all. However, the fact that I have communicated with her publicly doesn't mean I agree with her on that stance.
Have people tried to throw that at you?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're just like, what, instantaneously, if I say anything or respond to anything that she's done, it's, why are you associating with these people? Is the first thing that people say. Whereas it's, for me, it's kind of like, I don't know, I'm just doing what adults do, handling disagreements, handling the fact that people don't see the world the way that I see it. Because honestly, if I conducted myself in the way that you're acting like I should, merely based on this idea that I'm on the left and they're on the right,
Right.
like things that I feel much more passionate about would be way more divisive and drive me away from talking to people. I would tell everybody who's not a fucking vegan to fucking, fuck off and, be telling them they're a fucking murderous piece of shit and, they should fucking rot in hell.
Right.
Like, I'm not really all that passionate about whether or not you were offended because somebody said the N-word. I'm way more passionate that, you're contributing to the destruction of the environment and the torture of sentient beings just because, you feel like it's tasty to have some chicken. That I'm more passionate about than this other thing. So if, but personally, I don't feel like that's an effective way to spread the message. I don't feel like that's an effective or an efficient way to be a human being.
I've turned be super negative and condescending to everybody who has
everybody who doesn't see eye to eye with you.
That's funny. How long have you been vegan?
Almost 10 years.
And don't you think that that's sort of given you like the perspective on what a lot of these like extreme leftist people are going through, where like if you're a vegan, it's like you have to be vegan, and if you're doing it on behalf of the animals, you have to have at some point accepted that what you think that
I don't live in a vegan world,
and that 98% of the population or whatever it might be are involved in what is in your estimate essentially murder and supporting murder, but that at a certain point, okay, you have to live in a non-vegan world, and you have to accept that other people are going to do things you don't want them to do, and that experience is something that I feel like a lot of people on the left could stand to learn from.
The thing is, like, I've caught way more people and sort of turned way more people onto veganism just by kind of casually bringing it up and saying, like, every once in a while, like, hey, I've written like this weird multi-paragraph like vegan primer just to like get people, sort of educated on the whole thing, just to like throw people some reading material of kind of my personal experience and what I do. And I just say like, hey, if you ever want to read it or you just kind of want to be more in the know, just like email me at anthony@theneedledrop.com and I just send it to you right away. And, every single time I bring that up, I get dozens and dozens and dozens of people just like asking for it. And, a lot of people write back and they're like, okay, cool, I'm going to try this stuff. It sounds cool. And, and that's the thing. Like, I feel like what a lot of people who are sort of on the more authoritarian side of, kind of the vegan ideology don't quite understand that your average person just wants to lead a normal lifestyle. Right. They don't want to hop onto veganism because it's a mentality. They don't want to hop onto veganism because it's an ideology. They don't want to hop onto veganism because it's going to be some kind of big significant life change. If they get into the lifestyle, what they want to know is, can I be a vegan and still be a regular person and still like lead a normal life and still hang out with my friends and still be social and when we go out and eat and still like, everything being just as they are now, but I'm maybe eating healthier and making a more conscious decision. Like, that's what people want to know. Like, they don't want to, join up with veganism or join up with the lifestyle or start changing the way that they eat by way of joining what could potentially be a cult,
right?
Which like there's some people who are on that side of the fence on YouTube who do almost treat veganism like a cult.
That banana girl.
Yeah, but she's like kind of actually off of that whole train now. She's not promoting that lifestyle anymore.
Really?
And the guy who she dated at the time, who was kind of also kind of pushing that lifestyle too, and pushing her to kind of like really kind of.
And what was his name?
Durian Rider.
Okay. Yes.
Push her to evangelize that lifestyle. He got exposed for using steroids and, cheating on her and just generally being a total fucking scumbag.
Wow.
So now that whole scene of like extreme vegans, like totally like collapsed in on itself.
Really?
And, and that's the thing, I feel like anybody of any political extreme shade should see that and sort of like, learn from the example of that. Because like when you hold yourself to like this such high moral standard, you can't like continually live up to it all the time. And eventually it's like gonna burn you down,
Did you get some kind of satisfaction, as I did, from seeing Lacey Green essentially acknowledging that she was kind of behaving like an asshole for a few years there?
Yeah, absolutely. But I feel like there hasn't been a full acknowledgement of that, because I think some of her behavior sort of extends beyond the whole left-right, SJW, alt-right sort of dichotomy. Because in the past, I've known her to, like copyright strike or try to copyright strike videos that talk about her and that sort of thing.
In that way, okay.
And that to me is sort of like, it's not a left issue, it's not a right issue.
That's
it's just kind of a bit of a scumbag YouTuber issue, which like she's never quite addressed that or atoned for that.
Interesting.
you know, that's like kind of a very shady thing for me in the YouTube world.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah, but still, you know, if I completely subtract that out of the mix, you know, it has been entertaining and funny. I was just at a party the other day with her boyfriend.
So I like him. I've been following him on Twitter for a couple of weeks now,
like
and I
him
think
too.
he's funny. Yeah,
We've hung out on multiple occasions. He came
Chris
to my
Ray
house,
Gun, right?
Yeah, Chris Ray Gun. We've collaborated before on some videos. And
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
on the meme channel.
Oh, okay.
And he did a video on the main channel too, where we reacted to a really horrible song.
Oh, okay. I gotta check that out.
But from this rapper named Uncle Adams. You should try to get him on the show. Fucking Uncle Adams. He's a big Canadian rap meme.
He's probably already like scheduled. That's what we do. We fuck with shitty meme rappers.
Yeah, Chris Ray Gun. Shout out to Chris Ray Gun. He was at this party that I was at the last night, and I was just like breaking his balls. I told him that I feel like if him and Lacey Green have a baby, that baby could unite the two factions.
Right.
It could do one of two things. It could either unite the two factions and, like, you know, bring the alt-right and bring Antifa and bring, you know, the regressive left together, because, you know, sort of the beauty of the baby like melts everybody's hearts, or like makes their hearts grow 3 times their size like the Grinch. Or it becomes like a graphic novel saga situation, which is like this story about like these two people from 2 different alien races which are currently warring, and they get together and they have a baby, and then they're on the run because they're being, like, you know, manhunted because they decided to love each other and like have a baby.
I don't know if like the feminist community though could like willingly accept like the beauty of like a white baby. Like that to me seems like something that they would be fully disgusted by.
He's part Puerto Rican though.
Oh, but that doesn't count anymore. They like, you're not like on the scale, the sliding scale of like being a victim of injustice, unless you're like I don't know, Puerto Rican doesn't work anymore. It's like, because my whole thing, this is my experience in terms of how I viewed the N-word, is that, like, you know, I remember when I first found out the N-word was bad and that I wasn't allowed to say it because there was a Crisscross song where they said it like one time, and I said it around my mom singing along, and my mom yelled at me, and it wasn't so much like, oh, that's racist. It was more just like, that's a swear word, you're not allowed to say that. But being in New England, I never really like, you know, there were like plenty of Black and Puerto Rican people I would hear say it, but I didn't really hear that many white people say it. And usually when I did, it would be very, very like white trash people. Like, it wasn't the kind of people that I wanted to be like. Yeah. And then like most of my like opinion on how a white person should behave in hip hop was formed really from Eminem. Because there's nobody else that I really like what relevant white rappers did you have really after Eminem or before Eminem? There was Vanilla Ice. I was super young when
Beastie Boys.
The Beastie Boys, right?
Before I was listening to Eminem, I was listening to the Beastie Boys.
I've always hated the Beastie Boys.
Really?
Yeah, never liked them one thing. Oh. Girls, that's my least favorite song ever. Like, I could kill a person for playing that song. Like, that song creates a level of bloodlust inside of me.
What about Paul Revere, though? The song's amazing.
I hate that song.
You hate that song?
I hate everything they've ever made for the most part.
Was he in a quart of beer?
It's like nails on a fucking chalkboard.
I love that
song. To some extent, I can acknowledge that I like respect, you know, to some extent, I guess, but I don't know, just never went for it at all.
No, that's fine.
Anyway,
also let me check myself for calling the Beastie Boys white. Can I just call them white? Can I just call them straight white? Am I allowed to call the Beastie Boys white? I mean, you know, and
they're probably cis too.
They're white. They're cis. I mean,
that Buddhism ain't gonna save them.
Yeah, well, that's true.
No, but yeah, and then I remember. Okay, so my experience was basically like not really hearing people say it too often in real life, unless they were Black
or racist or Hispanic or trashy or
whatever. Right, you know, yeah, I definitely would hear maybe some like kids trying to be funny, like saying some racist jokes in high school or something with it. That sounds familiar. But then I moved to New York, and in New York, every white person that I met in New York, because I'm hanging out with all those BMX kids and we're hanging out at like skate parks and stuff like that, and I was really taken aback because all of a sudden every Hispanic kid, every Asian kid, every white kid said it too. And I never got on board.
Casual conversation.
Yeah. Not in just like a friendly way, or like, you know, and I had never been around that. And even as like a 19-year-old, like living in Brooklyn for the first time, I even then luckily knew like, oh, I don't want to say that.
That's not my vibe.
I would sound stupid saying that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's, you just kind of feel dumb doing it like that because it's not how you kind of came up, or it's not kind of like what you grew up in.
I never once have heard a white person say the N-word and been like, that was hot. She snapped. Yeah, that just, and I kind of resent like the implication, because I've seen that said about me too. Like, oh, Adam 22 is the type of white guy that definitely says the N-word when he's with his friends, or says it into the mirror or something. And I'm like, exactly. Dude, you really think that that's something that I'm like, that's the one? illicit behavior that
You
I'm
know,
holding out for.
That's like another weird white guy stereotype that I don't get, that like all white people are dying to say the N-word
Right.
all
or
the
just
time.
really want to be black
Like,
overall.
really, yeah, exactly. Really
I can
wanna
like
say
rap and sort of like be okay with being a white guy.
it. Yeah.
Totally fine with it.
Yeah, I don't hear rap music and I'm like, man, I'd really like to say the N-word right now.
Yeah.
You know, or it's like, you know, what's also funny is like there are a lot of rappers that I like that are black that don't use that word at all. You know, I
Really?
think it's like or barely use that word, so to
Interesting.
speak. You know, and the thing is like it's so funny because I think it almost like is based on this you know, sort of this false assumption that like saying that word somehow makes rap music make sense, or you need to use that word to make rap music, or it's like it's somehow like inherent to the genre, despite the fact that, you know, we have years and years and years of music before the 90s in rap music where that word was not quite as common as it did once hardcore hip hop kind of came into play.
Right.
You know, and even like, you know, during the days of like, I'm sort of you know, sort of going on a bit of a detour here, but you know, even when that word started seeping a little bit, like it was not as widely used then as it is now.
Right.
You know, where it's essentially you're just like rhyming the N-word with the N-word to like complete
Right.
bars, you know, essentially at this point.
I remember during the O.J. Simpson trial in 1996 that was the first time I ever heard the N-word. I don't know what they
like on broadcast
like
television.
a news. I think it might have honestly been like Judge Ito. I think it might have been like a courtroom setting that, you know,
it.
which I thought was really. I remember as a young kid thinking that's interesting. Like, oh, that's like the only word that you don't. It's so bad. Oh, I guess, you know, the F word.
Yeah.
They would say something like that on TV. But I remember like even as a kid thinking, you know, that's pretty unique right there. I was wondering this, like, were you, because, you know, you and I both, I think, are, you know, guys that affiliate with the left, but are pretty open towards having conversations with people with different political viewpoints and stuff. And in a lot of ways, I think
I feel like that's the only way to learn whether or not they're wrong.
right. I mean, certainly, yeah. And it's, so to me, I feel like my parents were friends with tons of conservative people. My parents are super diehard liberals that are, you know, worked, like my dad helped Bill Clinton on his like early primary campaign in New Hampshire and everything like that. And so that to me is very normal. My parents had a lot of friends at a really young age who were Republicans, and it never really stuck out to me that it was that out of the ordinary. Even as I got older and once I started to be more like into punk rock and stuff, and it sort of became like unthinkable to me, like, oh, like my dad's friend Bill like voted for Bush and he loves that. And it's sort of, I remember going through those phases where I would bring it up to my dad, like, how can you be friends with somebody that like blah, blah, blah. And, you know, he always had pretty like measured, reasonable answers. And I think is that almost kind of a Northeast thing as well? Like, did you have that experience growing up?
No, I mean, I guess both my parents growing up were actually conservative. My mother didn't actually take more toward the left side of the aisle until I did politically. And, you know, she started to see a little bit more of like kind of the light of day. My father kind of philosophically, I would say, is more right wing, but I think he's generally just kind of like disinterested in politics because he thinks all politicians are trash and that the whole system is, you know, kind of like impossible to work with, and you know, nothing good can really kind of come out of putting effort into it or caring about it. I think around like 12 or 13, I remember I was like really like even 11, I think I was like really like into Rage Against the Machine. And you know, it was really funny because like them uniquely out of any other sort of group that I had a cassette tape of at the time, like I didn't know a lot of what they were talking about, but I did get the sense that what they were singing about was a political thing. They were like singing about the world, you know. And
the few lyrics that you could kind of fully make out, you know, these people ain't seen a brown skin man since their grandparents bought one or whatever.
Yeah,
and that
exactly.
I remember that standing out to me as like, oh, that even though I kind of don't understand a lot of the other references, I get that lyric.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like it's moments like that was like, whoa, you know, music can be political, blah, 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 blah. You know, and I think since then I've kind of always had an interest in, I mean, not necessarily the political process as it is right now, but just kind of like what drives political and philosophical ideas.
I'm interested in politics as an extension of philosophy.
Yeah.
And how it actually like pragmatically can play out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, sort of like having a conversation with a guy like Milo Yiannopoulos is essential, you know, and that's why it's like, I feel like the less you know and the less you understand about Milo, the more harmful you think he is, because at the end of the day, he's not harmful for a handful of reasons. because one, while he may lampoon and he may make fun of SJWs, he has no concrete ideas or philosophies of his own. You know, his philosophies extend as far as like, you know, Daddy Trump or whatever.
Right.
You know, like once you actually kind of get into his ideas or what he thinks is important or what he thinks should actually be like instilled, like it's a lot of bullshit that either is a total pipe dream, as much a pipe dream as like, you know, turning America into a communist state or turning America into a white ethno state, or it's stuff that we've like already tried before and it's fucking retarded. You know, like he's like, oh, you know, people need to go back to religion and Catholicism is great and da 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 da, and it's like, get the fuck out of here.
Oh God, I love when the whole like when the alt-right or the conservative side ends up with that conclusion, is that like, oh, this is what happens when you put your faith in consumerism and this is why you should have just stayed in church and stuff. And that is like, never is there more of a moment where I'm looking at like the right side of things and I'm just like, no, like that.
Yeah, let's just like go back to the 80s and just like, you know, the
Milo,
like,
this homosexual who's like fully like, yeah, Catholicism, it's great. And it's
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just take it back to the 80s and the days of the PMRC, and you know, we'll see what like real PC outrage looks like. You know, because like it, and I had a funny conversation with my wife about this because she was saying, I love how I love how whether or not socially America is going right wing or left wing, we still end up at censorship.
Exactly. Isn't that hilarious?
Again, that's the horseshoe theory again. That's to say that when you go so far, no matter what side of the spectrum you're going on, you end up having more in common than you actually do. Because right now I feel like a lot of the political dichotomy, or where I sort of see a lot of the separation happening right now, isn't so much of a left-right thing. It's more of a libertarian versus authoritarian sort of thing, because you can have left-wing authoritarianism versus right-wing authoritarianism. Honestly, it's my philosophy that and my assumption and my theory that a lot of these alt-right kids are really fucking liberal, and the only reason that they're considering themselves to be alt-right is because they don't like SJWs. They don't like the idea of like some kind of blue-haired feminist telling them what to do or what to think.
Social justice warriors are driving people into the arms of Trump at an unbelievable rate.
They think that that represents left-wing philosophy.
Right.
You know, they think that is what the left is.
That's what they're turning against.
That's what they think it is. And not to say that, you know, it's feminists' fault, or, you know, to blame it squarely on them, because, you know, partially this is the fault of them for just being ignorant morons that think that that's what left-wing politics are from beginning to end, and that it's not, it doesn't run deeper than that, or that somehow they're representative of all left-wing politics and that's it. But that's just an extreme side of it.
But those people believe, and in many ways I think that they're correct, that like say the campaign of Hillary Clinton at some point had become kind of infected with like extreme liberalism to the point where she would
to a very small degree, but
only a small degree that shows through in her campaign, because we all know politicians to be extremely restrained and to not go off the deep end besides Donald Trump.
To the degree that she would placate them.
Right.
You know, because honestly, like a lot of the, you know, super economically left-wing parts of her platform didn't get worked in until Bernie Sanders had conceded to her and in their agreement had said, well, can you put in the free college platform? Can you put in the living wage platform? Like all of those things didn't end up in her platform until that happened. You know, like she was only sort of, you know, if you look back into the early announcement of her campaign, there's that infamous video of her talking to those Black Lives Matter supporters, saying to them like, well, you know, honestly, like you really just need to be advocating better to your, you know, to your local representatives and da 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 da. I can't do anything for you, you know, whereas like down the road, she was like totally on that bandwagon, you know, so it's like she's just as opportunistic as any other politician. You know, if she really cared about those issues, the moment that she had those young black kids in front of her sort of telling her how important this was to them, then she would have listened and she would have heard and she would have cared and she would have like, you know, acted interested in it from the get-go, as opposed to just like passing the buck onto, you know, somebody else, or saying that because they're in the situation that they are, the blame must lie on them. Right. Because they hadn't, you know, talked to the right politician, or they hadn't, you know, voted the right way, or they hadn't, you know, done the right activism or something. You know, whereas like, you know, we're talking about like, you know, there's nothing that you could lay onto the backs of black people that, as far as responsibility goes, that had anything to do with like, you know, Philando Castile getting killed in the way that he did. Right. You know, there's nothing that black people have done as a community that, you know, that warranted that or created that, you know, that kind of atmosphere. You know, that's just like a product of, you know, our broken system and the fact that, Police officers can get away with doing things like that with little to nothing in the way of punishment. It's the mere fact that there's no repercussions for that kind of thing that allows it to go on. It's like if you put anybody in that situation where they're basically above the law, lo and behold, you're going to see people abusing the law. You're going to see people acting like they're above the law. Sure, you're going to have some or maybe even most of the time people who will benevolently, not abuse that power, but there's going to be enough of them for it to be a trend and for it to be a really ugly trend too, especially in a day and age where everything's caught on camera, everything's uploadable to the internet, which instantaneously, that's just one guy dying. But the thing is, like, when everybody sees it, it seems like so much more of a big thing,
Right.
and it should be a big thing. It's a horrible thing. But it's watching that video and watching that context of it. It's almost like watching 100,000 people dying.
Right. Because
even
it's our assumption that happens all the time and not on camera.
Yeah, exactly. So
or at least too often. I mean,
yeah.
once is too often. But
once is too often. Absolutely.
because you can just imagine that scenario unfolding all the time,
Yeah.
where someone kills
So, I mean-
someone. I mean, that is just so uniquely evil when you watch that video. Doesn't it just seem
Oh,
like
it is.
it's so hard to wrap your head around it, and to me that makes it even more unthinkable that the NRA had nothing to say about it.
Absolutely nothing to say about it.
Baffling,
Baffling.
deafening silence. Because what is the X factor there that makes them not talk about it aside from race? You get it that the NRA very rarely wants to take a position that's anti-police, and
Absolutely.
I get that, and I get that, and I'm pro having police. I'm not some crazy anarchist that thinks we shouldn't have police. But when you watch that video, it's so hard to imagine how the gun lobby could not
It's cut and dry.
condemn it on at least a saving face level. Even if they really, really don't want to offend the police, there's an obligatory statement about that video that says this is not how the world should work, and that people should be able to carry guns legally, and that they should not be murdered for it. It's
Yeah, if that's going to be a
astonishing.
right people should have, then they should have the right to not get fucking killed for sort of,
Baffling.
expressing their right.
Yeah, but do you ever feel like something like that? I'm horrified by it, but I don't necessarily think that I have a lot to add to the discourse about it on Twitter, and I'm also not really like trying to turn my whole feed into a feed of me sort of like mindlessly retweeting activist content.
I think if there's honestly, I think it's good to keep people aware of it, but I think if there's anything that people need to learn in response to these things, it's that changing this sort of thing does not and will not and probably cannot, just from what I know about how our government works, cannot change at the federal level. Like, the president can't just come in and just be like, okay, cops can't kill people in cold blood and get away with it anymore.
Right.
Like, it needs to happen at the local level. Now, it's like, the bad news of that is that it's way less sexy. You need to actually go online and research who your, local police chief is and how exactly, the police station is funded and who, you could vote into office to influence the policy of the police force. That's the bad news. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
The good news is that because it's a local election, it's really fucking easy. We're talking about elections that if you get 100, if you get 200, if you get 500 people in the door who weren't planning on voting before, voting, for somebody who might actually go in there and do some change, you could sway that person in there, because
Right.
local elections, barely anybody fucking votes. You're talking about even midterm elections, like the voter rates just like drop off completely.
Right.
Like, that might be uniquely change this forthcoming midterm election because there is so much vitriol and hatred for Donald Trump
Right.
that people really might want to jump in there and like try to create some change immediately to prevent him from doing anything
It
else.
feels like people are almost like willing to do almost everything except actually, getting involved in local government.
Politics is not, it's not sexy.
There's nothing
it's
about
really
it,
not.
yeah.
Like, going on Twitter and being like, I think this and blah, 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 blah is like, kind of like the easiest, sexiest, most simply gratifying way to do it, because you get 800 retweets and people telling you like, hey, cool. That's really great. I agree with you.
Yeah.
But like, you can't get those 36,000 people.
Being an
that-
alderman.
Yeah, exactly. You can't get those 36,000 people that retweeted that tweet to go into a fucking voting booth.
Exactly.
And, there's going to be a serious drop off. But, again, the good news side of that is really good news that, very little people vote in local elections, and it's really easy to influence them if you get organized. But all you have to do is get organized, and once you are, you become an unstoppable force.
Could you see yourself going forward at some point becoming more occupied with like activism or social organizing or even being involved in government? Is that the kind of thing you ever thought about?
Like I have thought about it a lot, and it's just like at this point, I guess it's something that if I were to ever kind of get involved in, I guess what's kind of keeping me from doing it right now is it would be a serious sacrifice to my family, because not only would it put me in the public eye more, it would also mean like I'd be in a position where, the YouTube channel is going incredibly well. I don't want to put my family in a position financially, especially in a day and age when a single unexpected healthcare, sort of issue can bankrupt you almost overnight at the end of the month,
Right.
depending on what it is. I would rather my family be in a position where I can sort of afford that kind of thing,
Right.
because that sort of is scarier to me. If there was more of a safety net there, it would make more sense. If, and that's sort of, I think, another kind of an ugly part of our system. I feel like a lot of people are kind of less incentivized to get involved and sort of dabble in not even just politics, but, other enjoyable kind of, activities, because there is kind of that fear there of, there is no support there. Something horrible could happen to you, or, some loved one could get cancer and you have no means of paying for it. You have no means of keeping that person alive or whatever. You have some kind of pre-existing condition, and, either you're getting kicked off your insurance, or the premiums under Obamacare, because there's no market controls under Obamacare, because it's, just like a bullshit legislation that, originally it's just a healthcare mandate.
Right.
You're just forcing everyone to buy healthcare. Hopefully the prices go down and sort of stabilize, because everybody is in the system as opposed to just some people having healthcare.
Right.
Which was originally an idea that Mitt Romney had, originally an idea that Bob Dole had. It's a Republican healthcare plan. Mm-hmm. That's essentially what it is. And it just was marketed by a Democratic president.
Right.
It's a bullshit plan.
So you tell me, what are the changes that you think Donald Trump is potentially going to make to Obamacare?
Well, I mean, obviously,
Because he's got to, like, in name, he has to get rid of it,
Trump,
right?
honestly, at this point, he doesn't know how the political system works.
Right. He doesn't know what Obamacare is.
He doesn't know how any of it works. He's made that painfully obvious, and he's even said on multiple occasions, he said that Scotland has great health care. They have socialized medicine.
Right, yeah.
He said that he went down to Australia and was hanging out with the Australian Prime Minister, and he said, "You guys have great health care. We don't have good health care right now, but you guys have great health care." Yeah, guess why the fuck they have great health care? He doesn't know how the system works. Right now he's just doing the bidding of the Republicans. He's just a figurehead at this point.
At this point, I could not.
What he's going to do to Obamacare is just whatever the Republicans want to do to Obamacare.
I
and what the
never could have
Republicans
expected him to be such a fucking to just suck up to the Republican Party so much. Like the way he came into office, it's like you thought he might have owned it a little bit, that he was an iconoclast. And instead he's decided to, but he was always an iconoclast without any kind of ideology.
Exactly, because over the course of the whole election, he was pretty much on both sides of every issue.
Right.
You had clips of him saying, we should go after the terrorists and their families. We should go after the terrorist families. It's not enough to kill the terrorists. We need to kill their mothers. We need to kill their brothers. We need to kill this and that. Mm-hmm. And then also, we need to get out of these foreign interventions. We can't be in these foreign interventions. It's a waste of money.
Right.
It creates more terrorists. Obama created ISIS, through these foreign interventions. So it's like, and that's just one of dozens of issues that he's been on both sides of.
Right. And it's like, if you were a person who didn't really have the mental faculties in order to like come up with your own platform or your own way of that you would think, which he has really conveyed to us over and over and over, that he's on both sides of both issues because he doesn't really understand what either side entails. If you're a person with a completely free form identity of what you thought was right and wrong, that would be the easier way to go about it, is to sort of just fit in with the party that you are a part of.
I literally think that he thought he was going to get into office and just be king.
Yes.
Because, over the course of his, election cycle, he did say things consistently like, we're going to renegotiate NAFTA. We are going to make sure that these business owners bring their money back over here. We're going to make sure that they bring their jobs back over here. And the thing is, once you get into the presidency, you actually have to have a Republican administration willing to carry that out for you. That is not in the interests of the Republican Party at all. Not only that, but the Democrats are bought out by many of the very same interests that the Republicans are. There are barely any Democrats that want to renegotiate NAFTA. I mean, NAFTA went through under a Democratic presidency, you know, so it's like, you know, these trade deals that, you know, basically benefit corporations and that's it. You know, it's like, you're not going to go in there and sort of change that, you know, it's like you have to actually like create interest in changing that, you know, and Donald Trump isn't the type of person who I think actually like wants to care about, you know, actually like creating change. I think he just wants to be liked and go with the flow.
Yeah, and it's bizarre because I mean, if he wants to be liked, wouldn't you think that he would? There was a certain point where I thought he was going to almost become president and sort of become sort of like more of a populist character, and you know, not
that's
try
how
to
he ran.
Yeah, and
It's fake populism.
And I thought that he was going to at a certain point, like, oh, he wants to be liked, so maybe he'll do things that would make him more liked, and he seems like he's really kind of gone the other way.
Yeah, no, I think it sort of depends on who he's trying to get to like him. You know, he's trying to like suck up to truck drivers. He's trying to suck up to coal miners. I mean, those are the kinds of groups of people that, you know, you put them on a pedestal, you take advantage of them as kind of like a photo op. And that's the sort of thing that, you know, Republican voters will applaud and be like, yeah, he's really caring about blue collar people and blah, 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 blah.
Well, and he's right in that it's probably better for him to do a somehow authentic job of appealing to those people rather than to in any way try to engage with the left at all, because the left's never going to accept him no matter what side he ends up on, for better or for worse, understandably. But
you know, I think honestly, if he started doing legitimately good things that were like really benefiting people, eventually they would have to admit they're wrong, you know, but unfortunately at every turn he just keeps proving them right. You know, I think you know, there's only so much that you can kind of bullshit yourself into believing that, you know, X is Y,
right?
You know, before you just kind of realize that, like, hey, you know, it's like I feel like, you know, I feel like this past election really kind of put the Obama years into perspective, and I just kind of feel like it was this presidency about nothing. You know, it's like if your key legislation can be just like completely overwritten and just like completely erased like so instantaneously. Like, what exactly else did we get over those 8 years? I mean, we started under Obama in 2 foreign interventions. We expanded that to 7. We had the Arab Spring where you had Hillary Clinton basically like playing the Middle East like a chessboard. You know, NSA spying increase like however fold, 2-fold, 3-fold, 10-fold. You know?
But do you buy into the argument that basically because the mainstream media had so little to say about Obama's interventionist foreign policy and his, you know, all these other things, and, you know, the spying on our citizens and stuff like that, and the fact that the mainstream media had so little to say about it and was so not inclined to really pick apart his legislation and stuff, do you sort of buy into that ideology? Whereas like right now, the leftist media is having a field day ripping apart everything apart, like take a terrorist attack, or like, you know, when we send like a strike overseas, and with Trump it's like they're really looking to find ways to paint that strike as Donald Trump fucking up, whereas Obama was involved in all kinds of heavy drone activities that
I don't quite see that as much. I mean, when he struck Syria with those Tomahawk missiles, they acted like it was the greatest fucking thing he'd ever done.
Right.
You know, there were so many commentators that were like, that was when he became presidential. When it's like, yeah, okay, so he became presidential the moment he started just like hurling bombs at some country that didn't attack us. Like, that's presidential. That automatically gets you into the presidential club. That and the moment that after he did that raid in Yemen and that Marine died, you know, he had you know, the wife there grieving in front of Congress, in front of everybody, and crying and applauding and You know, that was another moment. I think a commentator on CNN, Van Jones, was like, he became presidential in that moment. You know, where essentially he turned, you know, some grieving widows, loss of her husband into pro-war porn for the rest of the country to eat up and be like, oh, this is just like so justified, despite the fact that when you look at the actual logistics and casualties and the numbers of that raid, you killed an 8-year-old girl. You didn't get the guy that you went in there originally to get. You got no intel, and most of the people that you killed weren't even terrorists.
Right.
So it's like you got nothing out of it, virtually nothing, except the death of an American soldier that you basically just like put up on a pedestal to justify what.
But a lot of people on the left, I think, really wanted to paint those like Trump's early military interventions. Like they wanted to paint them as
that one was a big faux pas and flub for him.
Whereas like when you look at Obama, it's like I didn't really see much criticism of the things that were taking place. Like
no, because I think the left just kind of got lazy because they just wanted to continually pat themselves on the back because we got in a Democrat finally after the Bush years. The Bush years were finally over, and lo and behold, we had a black president too. It's like it's some kind of show of like we're really progressing as a country, despite the fact that not only did the Republicans do their best to obstruct almost everything he wanted to do, but also you had a good wing of the corporate side of the Democratic Party, which are really just like Republican light, standing in the way of real like economic progress and change too. Because over the course of Obama, he didn't take advantage of all of the groundswell of support for re-regulating Wall Street, and just basically let, Occupy Wall Street just like devolve and fail and just like crumble into nothing because, obviously the people can only sort of advocate for something for so long before, the representatives just kind of like actually have to do something in order for it to kind of like actually, snowball into anything,
right?
Because if it is a representative democracy, you're seeing people demand something. It's like you have to, But the thing is, what they're representing are their donors. They're not representing the demands of the people. They're just representing their donors, and that's it. For the most part, there are people who do stand out, and there's kind of a new movement on the left called Justice Democrats, where you do have kind of a lot of these people who, the philosophy is there in terms of like, hey, let's get a living wage, let's get healthcare, Medicare for all, and let's end it with the foreign wars and like reinvest that money over here. Let's get better education. That's all part of the platform generally, but like but that's almost secondary to the idea that they take no donor money, no PAC money. And some of them are successfully already primarying some of the more corporate and conservative Democrats, that are, in Congress, in the House, and the Senate. They're starting to like ramp up doing some of these campaigns. And again, like some of them I might disagree with philosophically because some of them do sort of hang on that more, super progressive side of the party. But the thing is, like, I feel like once we do, and if we can get all or either a bulk of the money out of politics, then I feel like we can actually have a legitimately authentic conversation about like political philosophy. Because as of right now, I feel like so much of the well is poisoned by the fact that, you're purposefully not getting the problem and you're purposefully not understanding the point or not embracing the solution because you're financially incentivized not to, sort of get or understand the solution. And I kind of understand, from the perspective of these politicians, why? Because, I was doing like a little research online about how much do these motherfuckers get paid, and honestly, like some of them don't make that much, and you're talking about these guys who they have to live in DC, either away from their families who live back home. So they have to like make enough money to pay for them to live, some rent or some mortgage over there, or you move all their asses out to DC, which is also really fucking expensive. So it's like, and probably move them into a private school because you're talking about your kids kind of being in the public eye and like politically connected because, and honestly, like all these people, unless you're like some kind of high ranking like official or, you're some kind of high ranking senator or something, you don't get security, kind of like with that Steve Scalise thing.
Yeah.
Like, he was the only person there during that baseball practice who had security. And had he not been there, there would have been no security. So it's like all those, politicians would have been totally just like sitting ducks to that dude if he just decided to unload on all of them.
Right.
So it's like, you're really out in the open and there's not really much incentive for you not to take money from lobbyists. It's actually super easy to be taking money from lobbyists.
And if you're a guy who's making 80 grand a year and you start dangling 50 or 100 grand in front of their eyes at a time, time, I mean, 0% shocking in how they react.
And not even that much. It's just like just to offer them like 10% of their income. It's actually like it's funny like what I make on YouTube. And I'm not like trying to brag here or anything, but like what I make on YouTube, or at least, what I can save up in a month sometimes, is like what some asshole pharma dickhead like contributed to some major politician's campaign.
I remember those days.
And it's just like, wow, if I give so-and-so like $6,000, can I decide politics too? It's just like way too easy to like buy into the system.
Right.
It's just like way too easy to take advantage of it for like fucking $6,000. Like that's it. Now, of course there are like, other ways that some of that dark money, sort of comes in, maybe that's just publicly what we're seeing, exchange hands. And honestly, that's like probably not anything I would involve myself in, because I don't think I could really kind of like sway politics to benefit my music reviews in any kind of way. Like if I could kind of draconianly force everyone to watch them by some kind of decree from Donald Trump or something.
Do you ever think that, because a lot of times I'll feel like, I'm 33, I'm still talking about rap right now, but maybe at some point I'm going to be 45 and I'm still going to want to talk about stuff online, but it's probably going to be more likely politics or anything more far-reaching that might seem, sometimes I think like maybe Lil Pump at 45 is not going to seem as interesting to me as it does at 33. And it's kind of shocking that it still is.
Pumps.
There will be many more Lil Pumps, but I'm almost hoping that there is a day in which I'm not really that interested in them anymore.
Okay, well maybe it'll happen then.
Well, perhaps.
But I mean, politics is interesting, but I think like, again, it's like having politics is interesting, but I think for most people having a real conversation about politics is not interesting.
Right.
Like I said, when I was on that dude's stream who was a part of the skeptic community, some black guy, shout out to some black guy. When I was talking about something as radical as like, hey, let's like make it so that when people work 40 hours a week, they're not homeless. People are like, fuck you, you liberal cuck, you fucking libtard.
Yeah.
And, it's just like something as simple as like thinking like, hey, maybe people shouldn't be kicked off their health insurance just because they have someone with breast cancer in their family or something like that. Or they have someone with diabetes.
But
in their
that's
family.
considered like a political statement now at this point.
Yeah. It's like just to be like compassionate, towards somebody else's like, problems. And, that's to my earlier point when you were talking about, sort of Hillary Clinton kind of placating or, like trending toward the side of like, far left politics. I mean, honestly, the response to me to this problem of like, hey, or, there are like a lot of ugly, very extreme voices popping up on the left. Sure. But the answer to that is not to abandon ship and jump to the right.
Right.
Like, how's that the fucking answer? Because
but that can be frustrating to people like us who are maybe a little bit more sensible and have a little bit more of a classical liberal style of viewing the world, right?
Sure, yeah. But the thing is, again, it's not, the answer is not to all of a sudden advocate for whatever the Republicans are advocating for, because then you're essentially getting the Bush years all over again. And were the Bush years good? No, the Bush years were fucked. So if you want a repeat of the Bush years, do that retarded strategy. If you want to actually fix the left, you have to stay in there, because not only are you not fixing the problem by jumping to the right, you're actually giving the extreme left more power because you've left the area. You've given them more sway. You've said, okay, well, it's all yours.
But is leftism just going to die off because it's going to become completely infected by like evergreen college?
I don't know, honestly, because like while you do kind of have like these weird pockets of extremity, among some of these leftists, take into account the fact that what's sort of unique about a lot of these college protests and why these protests continue to thrive and happen on these college campuses is because the colleges allow them to happen. And the reason that they allow them to happen is because you're essentially talking about, it's almost like a customer revolt, because at the end of the day, the colleges are going to placate these kids and they're going to give them whatever they want, or at least, try to make them happy, because they don't want them to unenroll,
right?
Because that's less money in their pockets. Like they'll listen to these kids protests all day about, white people being kicked off of campus for a day.
Right.
In the same way that McDonald's would allow you to protest because there wasn't enough fries that day, because it's like, we're going to let you protest in the McDonald's because you really want, this product and you're the customer and we want to placate you because we want your money. If you're under the impression that these colleges really actually care about what you think, you're fucking wrong. They're listening to what you have to say because you're a dollar amount to them.
Right.
And if they give you what you want, it's not because you're right, and it's not because you had a point. It's because you're a dollar amount to them.
Okay.
Like, I would love to see these people outside of a legit like police station, like, protesting, like, because again, what we just talked about with Philando Castile, that's still going on right now. That has not changed.
Right.
That's still the norm. That's still what's going on right now.
But it's like it's less appealing for people to make a big stink out of like real social injustice when you could kind of say, hey,
well, it's
look
hard.
at yes,
It's
Jules.
hard and it's inconvenient, you know, because honestly, at the end
And
of
depressing.
the day, and it's depressing. The cops aren't going to come out of the police station and say, "Well, we've thought about it,
Yeah.
and you're right."
Right.
You know, you can't corner the police chief in the same way that you can corner the president of the college in his office. Because the moment that you do that, a bunch of cop cars are going to roll up and they're going to gun you down.
Right.
And that's going to be the end of that. And the way the news is going to portray it, they're going to be like, a bunch of extremists did this and it was apparently okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's like they're going to frame it in such a way the cops look good. You know, it's like you can't pin down a cop like that in the way that you can pin down the president of the university. It doesn't work like that. And that's why they do it, because it's easy.
Right.
You know, it's an easy win. That doesn't actually do anything.
I'm gonna go piss real quick. We just had 3 hours, and I just have to piss because I can't finish this unless I piss. Okay.
Do you want to replace him?
I'm not allowed to be on the podcast.
Oh, you're not allowed. Oh, you're not allowed.
You got one question.
Hey, what up?
What's up, guys? Last time I was on here, I was blackout drunk. Hi.
What up?
Oh, so weird. I really don't know what to ask you.
Does he have a bunch of dumb questions there on the computer?
No, I'm looking at some sort of tracking mechanism for audio.
Oh, okay. Got it.
I know where he keeps his questions, but honestly, I'm probably gonna find some shit I don't want to find on here, so I'm just gonna stay away from the computer.
What kind of shit? Like relationship ending shit, or just like him fingering his butthole or something?
He won't let me put my pinky in his butthole, so if he's fingering his own butthole, I'm gonna be mad.
Really, is that a demand?
I mean,
Is
it's
that
not
like
a demand, but it's like,
just curious.
I just feel like he would enjoy it.
Just he would like it.
And I let him put his whole penis in my butthole, so like a pinky, I just
A
feel
pinky versus a penis.
Exactly. I'm just
Why
like,
not?
You know, like, come on. And he's very like explorative. You know, he's like willing to try stuff. So I'm just like,
So why not a pinky? Why not just a friendly pinky?
he claims that it's because he has a hemorrhoid back there. I don't feel bad saying it because he said it on another podcast once. But
Okay.
I think one day.
But you could see a hemorrhoid.
I've seen his butthole a million times.
Okay,
That's
so
why I
then
feel
like
facing it. I don't know why he's acting like it's
like a hemorrhoid is like a visual, like
We're talking about your
it's
butthole, of course, immediately.
hem-
Yeah.
yeah. A hemorrhoid is like a visual, like is a very clear visual thing. You can't say that would be like me saying I have a giant lesion on my neck here. You can clearly see that there's not a lesion here. So it's like for me to say that there's just like a hemorrhoid there and you don't see a hemorrhoid, then it's like that's just bullshit.
I just really want to put my finger in his butt, and he won't let me.
Okay. Get out of here. I thought you guys were actually going to talk about something interesting for a second. Talk about finger.
That's not interesting.
That's just her old standby. That's all she ever wants to talk about is my asshole.
Okay.
Yeah.
The old asshole, the old chestnut.
You let your wife dig around in there ever?
Oh no.
No.
She's had no interest.
Yeah. I wish I could
I
say the
guess that's
same.
the one personal thing I'll say.
Yeah. Okay. You had your chance to talk. You don't have a mic now.
Got it.
And she immediately starts talking about Milo, talking about finger on my butthole or something, which I don't even remember. That was like a suggestion that a lot of my friends were saying is like, oh, like you're gonna interview Milo, and we all know you are real interested in him. Are you gonna make out with him? And then in the course of that interview, before that even was able to like come up as like a joke or anything, he just basically said that there are like tons of straight men who like want him to be their first gay kiss, like when he goes to these conventions and stuff. Which is,
God, I believe it.
yeah, I bet I could totally imagine that. Even though I feel like his whole wave has sort of fallen off.
Oh, it has, because Trump is elected now, and he had that whole, pedophilia thing that did not look good.
That didn't help him out on like a mainstream level when they
And
kind of
what's
take away the
funny is
Breitbart thing.
I watched that podcast that he said that on the day that he said it.
The Drunken
Peasants podcast.
Right, yeah.
So it's funny to me that came back to bite him, because that podcast was like a year old.
Yeah, and he said almost the exact same thing on mine. And that was the main thing that I like really was like pressing him on, like to get him to clarify those remarks. And he basically ended up being like, I think he said like, well, I'm not talking about a 14-year-old and a 30-year-old.
Yeah.
So then like, but which it's to me right then, I'm like, okay, so maybe you're talking about you know, a 16-year-old boy, and automatically he was sort of admitting that he wasn't talking about like real pedophilia when he sort of said that, like, you know, man boy love is like part of the gay experience of growing up, you know, which is like, you know, saying like, oh, maybe like a 16-year-old kid and a 25-year-old guy is like, okay, well, that sounds a little less offensive than like when you're at a certain point, people thought that he was like co-signing like actual pedophilia, which I don't think he ever.
I mean, maybe that might not have been his intent, but the way that he put it, it was like really
he put
callous.
it in a very careless way, because which is his way. That's his thing. That's what he does.
Yeah, it is. And I think, you know, he was joking about it in a way, and honestly, like, I think he did sound very serious. He did sound very serious, and it did sound like he was definitely, you know, like not being as satirical as he claimed he was being, you know, afterwards.
He was feeling himself at that point.
He definitely was. He definitely was.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily like agree with that being like the thing that took him out the game, though. I think in terms of like offensive things he said, I could think of a lot more offensive things he said.
I could too, you know, and that's the thing. It's like, to me, when I saw that originally, I didn't see that and think, oh, well, he's done now. You know, I thought like, well, this is just kind of one more thing in a string of like crazy shit that he always says. Right. You know, like he's, you know, you would think at this point he would be sunk merely by the fact that, you know, like early on, before he was kind of getting started with the whole Gamergate thing, like he was, you know, talking about how, you know, it's shameful to be gay, and you know, I'm ashamed of being gay, and you know, the gay lifestyle is, you know, not good, and you know, it's caused me to be so you know, promiscuous and, you know, risky, and and you know, gay people should do X, Y, or Z. You know, he was almost like, you know, trying to shame gay people out of being gay or something. Right. You know, and you'd think that would have sunk him, or that would have done something to hurt his career, but you know, for some reason it's been this one thing that, you know, sort of took him down, and it was like it was almost like it was kind of like planned or something, or like, you know, orchestrated in a way, not like in a kind of conspiratorial kind of way, but, you know, the way that kind of all of journalism sort of convened on this one thing.
Oh, I believe that 100%, that there was a sort of a implicit collusion.
Let's like pig pile on this guy.
Totally.
It was like, you know, once people sort of saw that Achilles heel exposed, it was like, let's do it.
And pedophilia is like that one rare thing. Like it's
fuck with pedophilia.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, you could totally, like, me and you could just start chanting the N-word right now, and that would do nothing in comparison to a good solid pedo accusation.
Yeah, exactly. to like saying what Milo said, that would, like, you know, we would get over just like chanting the N-word like it was a fucking sports chant.
What a mental image right there.
That we would definitely get over that. But, you know, saying what Milo said during that stream, and you being like, yeah, I totally agree, and then taking that a little further, that would be insane.
That was probably the number one thing that I really wanted to ask him about too, because I had never heard a gay man like acknowledge that there was any level of like normalcy about, like, you know, a much older man with a young boy. But at the same time,
as far as I've always known, like you know, pride groups and gay groups have always been very hostile toward groups like NAMBLA and that sort of thing. Very hostile, because they don't want that to represent the rainbow, as it were.
When I was like 18, like, me and my friends thought NAMBLA was about the funniest thing ever.
Yeah, it's pretty preposterous.
NAMBLA, for the record, is North American Man Boy Love Association,
an advocacy group for pedophilia.
At a certain point, it occurred to me, like, oh, like, I actually went to the NAMBLA website and tried to find like a good like NAMBLA logo, because I was like, that's a logo rip right there, is if you could kind of take the NAMBLA logo and make it like your brand name or something. And I didn't like find any sort of like cool like iconography or anything. It was pretty bad.
Yeah, I don't think there's many like talented graphic designers in the pedophile community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's probably for the best. At least we know that like that's not where the arts are being drawn towards.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point.
I mean, I was just listening to the Sam Harris podcast where he said he was really horrified by how well the editorial was done in like the ISIS magazine at a certain point, like that the spelling and the punctuation were like really pristine, and even the graphic design, and they even acknowledged on the podcast that like you could tell in the ISIS magazine when there would be like a raid where like a bunch of people were locked up or thrown in jail, because then all of a sudden in the next month's issue the graphic design would go to shit. or like there would be spelling mistakes all of a sudden.
I remember watching an episode of The Daily Show where they played a song that ISIS recorded.
Really?
And honestly, I'm not worried until they start coming out with some good tracks, because that song fucking sucked. Like it was not a good song. Like until they like come out with like some Lil Pump style, like some, you know, like pro Sharia law shit. You know, like I'm actually not going to be worried as far as like, you know, ISIS taking over through the arts or like through good like magazine formatting.
Yeah,
like,
I mean they're kind of like directly opposed to the arts, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not really gonna be worried until I hear like a good like ISIS little pump banger, and it's like playing in the club like over here. Like you have people like
the Sharia law anthem, because when they do these anti-Sharia law protests, they're acting as if that's actually what it's like. It's like there's just Sharia law is like being promoted everywhere you go. Which is like, you know, I know people who live in England who actually like have like scary experiences with like not wanting to go to certain areas at night and stuff, because there is like a scary migrant problem.
Okay.
Which is always been interesting to me, because in America it feels like it's mostly fictitious.
It does feel like it's fictitious. I mean, personally, I don't know a lot about it. I have seen like some journalistic reports, and you know, not like from Breitbart or anything like that. You know, talking about how, you know, you basically have these just like over here in America, you know, when you have youths who are unemployed and they don't have anything else to do because the economy is just like garbage, and you know, they're basically they don't fit into the culture, they don't fit into the inner workings of the country economically. They're going to be disenfranchised, and they're going to lash out, and they're going to act in, you know, other ways, you know, that don't benefit themselves.
Totally. You know, I'm really interested in anyone who could make it through this whole podcast, because there's all this music talk for like at least like the first hour and a half, and then it just sort of like becomes all political.
Every podcast I've done recently has just like turned political at some point, and I'm just kind of used to it at this point.
Well, because I think for like people like me and you, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that music only allows for a certain amount of depth or a certain amount of importance or weight. So like politics sometimes to me seems like that's sort of what I'm drawn towards discussing, just because it feels a little bit more grave, whereas like discussing like styles of production sort of feels sort of superfluous in comparison.
That's interesting, as long as you're talking to an interesting producer, or a producer has a unique sound. You know, like
exactly.
If I was probably having a conversation with Flying Lotus, I don't think politics would come up once.
Right.
You know, unless he brought it up.
Well, I don't necessarily want to talk about politics with like, you know, a producer, but I feel like a lot of times, you know, having a rap conversation, you sort of feel like you're having like a very similar conversation over and over. And so then with like the politics thing, it's kind of like, well, at least it's challenging. At least it's like more to think about. Yeah,
in the middle of a lean haze, you're just like, so who'd you vote for? Who'd you vote for? Vote for President Lean.
Is there anything we should knock out before we wrap up this 3 hour and 10-minute podcast that we just did?
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, for real. I'm really glad we did this, especially considering.
Should we say?
Oh, smash the like and leave a comment. We probably should have said that in the beginning.
Smash the like and say 100 dicks if you made it all the way through the podcast.
Right. Hashtag 100 dicks is what we do. We always like throw in, like, I just interviewed this hardcore band and it was hashtag blue ribbon.
So if you've made it all the way through the podcast, 100 dicks.
Hashtag 100 dicks. And tell us a story about the last time that you sucked a dick or had your dick sucked. Just fill us in.
Pinky in your booty hole.
Yeah, which we now know that Anthony Fantano's not terribly interested in, even though I'm pretty sure that Lena the Plug shoved her finger in his ass while he was in the bathroom.
What?
Or while I was in the bathroom. I want to put it past her. She's all about the butthole.
Yeah, it was while you were in the bathroom. I was on the dance floor when it happened.
Right. Well, that's just like kind of her whole vibe. She's always trying to stick her finger in somebody's stink hole. Anyway, anything you want to get out of the way? Probably not. You're having a conversation with your viewers all the time.
YouTube.com/theneedledrop, Twitter.com/theneedledrop, Instagram @Fantano. Instagram, don't have a fucking not Snapchat. Don't have a fucking Snapchat.
Adam22Ho. If you want to follow somebody on Snapchat, you ain't got to follow him.
That's true.
Adam22Ho. HOE.
He'll be a much better Snapchatter than I will be any day.
Yeah, this guy ain't even putting his wife on in his social media content. What the hell? I'm over here flaunting mine. Ooh, wife. Take it back. Anyway, thank you very much to Anthony Fantano. This has been a great conversation, long time coming. Really enjoyed myself, bro.
Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Check us out. No Jumper, coolest podcast in the world. YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes. We out. Wow. There you go. I really wish I'd held on to that P. Yeah?
If you don't fuck with me, you're a stupid, dumb idiot. If you don't fuck with me, you're a stupid, dumb idiot. I'm ballin' like an athlete, but got no jumper. I'm ballin' like an athlete, but got no jumper.